In these challenging times, when the world is slowly recovering from the pandemic, we are reminded of a sobering fact. Nelson Mandela rightly said, "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." We got to experience that fall in the last 2 years when the pandemic struck the whole world. It gave a tough time to the individuals, and the businesses suffered losses to a large extent. It was an unprecedented situation for the supply chains and operations of most of the companies. Massive disruptions were seen over all the industries, but businesses are getting back on their feet, constantly emphasizing on making their supply chains robust again to prevent losses from any such mishaps in the future. We are seeing companies resorting to more and more technological solutions to become more efficient, thus giving rise to intelligent supply chains worldwide.
The 9th Global Supply Chain Management Conference offers a number of exciting opportunities for academics and practitioners with multidisciplinary interests. It gives them a chance to interact and explore research opportunities, curricular innovations, and their delivery, to seek partnerships between academia and practice communities dealing with all aspects of business that overlap with the supply chain and technology management. The purpose of this conference is to investigate various aspects of these complexities and explore competitive strategies across the global business landscape.
Somaiya Institute of Management has invited students and researchers from across the globe to submit their research papers for the conference, the best of which will be presented in the afternoon session of the conference. Along with this, we also received articles from around the world for the international edition of our quarterly magazine, Momentum December 2021 edition. Not just this, a case study competition and a simulation game competition were conducted leading up to this conference, which saw participations from the most esteemed institutions across the nation.
We would now like to invite our Honorable Director, Dr. Monica Khanna, for the inaugural address. Dr. Monica Khanna has completed her electrical engineering from National Institute of Technology, Warangal, MMS from NMIMS, and PhD from University of Pune. She has been associated with Somaiya Institute of Management for over 25 years, and her academic experience spans the area of marketing, strategic brand management, and market research. She has been a visiting faculty at IIT Bombay Shailesh J. Mehta School of Management, NITI Mumbai, DHPW Stuttgart, Germany, and Institute of Industrial Management, Economics and Trade, St. Petersburg Polytechnic University, Russia. She has successfully guided 3 doctoral candidates from University of Mumbai and BIT Mesra, Ranchi. She also has an industry experience of over 4 years in engineering and industrial automation with Siemens Limited at Mumbai. We request Dr. Monica Khanna to address the audience gathered here to kickstart the event. As always, it is wonderful to have you amongst us, ma'am. The stage is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Very warm welcome to all of you. And I'm really happy to be once again to be part of the Global Supply Chain Management Conference. I'm happy to see so many delegates and all the students who have gathered here today for this conference. The theme for this conference being intelligent supply chain, I think that's a very, very apt theme. Today, everything is become flexible and everything has become fluid. The manner in which the technology has evolved over especially over the last, I think, 5 years, and more so the focus has been on the technology in the COVID era, that is in just in the past 2 years. I think it's very important that technology is completely woven into the supply chain. So whether we are providing a service or whether we are providing a product, and whether we are providing a service or a product all mixed together, I think it's very important to have a very intelligent supply chain, which is completely, led by automation, and it is led by machine learning and various other technologies that are there. So the intelligent supply chain, being a marketing person, I think it is number one, the entire supply chain will be pulled by the consumer. And the amount of freedom and flexibility that the consumer needs or the consumer is expressing, I think that is something that the supply chain has to fulfill, and the entire value chain has to move along with it. Today, if you just see the manner in which we buy insurance policies, or the manner in which we even buy, let's say, products like, all our household items, or even if we buy, luxury products or whether we buy cars or bikes or scooters, everything, it may be online, it may be offline, but somewhere we have to keep the consumer in the center. So the entire intelligent supply chain has to keep the consumer in the center and what are the needs and the requirements of the consumer. Today, the entire supply chain also is becoming very, very complicated because there are other agents which are coming in and which are giving you alternate channels of distribution. So the amount of choices that the consumer has is completely unbelievable, and the entire supply chain has to move accordingly. I mean, some of the things that I think of is that when we are designing our supply chain, we have to think of what is our core product and what is the supplementary product or service that we are providing. In the past few days, I was just seeing the front page advertisement of Lenovo, and on some days they were advertising for Lenovo, and on the other days they were actually advertising for Lenovo services. And on one day they were actually advertising along with the Intel, that is the co-branding, the ingredient brand for the Lenovo laptops and its products. So you can just imagine how much of focus is coming in. It's not just about selling the product, but it's also about selling the complementary service along with it. And the service aspect, according to me, for any product is becoming even more important. As a country, we are daily interacting with the various supply chains. Like, for example, let's say the supply chain for the milk. You know, early morning at 6 o'clock, you have milk at home. Early morning at 6 o'clock, I have the newspaper at home. So this is a 24/7 supply chain that's working. And for us, this is no strange aspect. But today, this entire concept of 24/7 supply chain, it has been thrown open to all products and services. As far as the education industry is concerned, we can see the manner in which the entire value chain or the supply chain has changed, because we can study any product, any aspect that I want, whether it is a subject or whether it's for reskilling or things like that, and it is on the anywhere, anytime mode. So companies like Coursera, companies like Upgrad and all, and companies like Byju's, the type of services that they're providing us, the entire concept of supply chain and giving value to the customer has completely changed. So this is applicable not just for products, but I think in every aspect of our life today. And all of us today, I think the supply chain further is going to become led because of the smartphones that we have. Because of the smartphones that we have and the accessibility to the internet that we have through our mobile phones, I think that will further enhance the requirement and the concept of an intelligent supply chain. So, I mean, there are various aspects and there are various facets to intelligent supply chain. Another aspect that seems to be very contemporary today, and that is called about the green supply chain. So it's not just about supply chain, it's not just about intelligent supply chain, but it's also about sustainability, and it's about giving a very good solution to our consumer without harming the planet, because these are the things that are today becoming at the forefront. And thanks to the COVID, I think a lot of awareness about such aspects have come into the minds of the consumers have evolved, and these are becoming base expectations for them. So whether it's an intelligent supply chain, whether it's a green supply chain, or whether it's a circular economy, I think these things are something which most of us seem to have, it may have been in somewhere in the periphery of our mind, but today all these things have become mainstream. So I would like to congratulate the organizers for, number one, thinking of this theme and getting the type of research papers that you have got and the type of speakers that you have got for this conference. I wish you all the very best, and I wish you a whole day of happy learning, debating, and discussions. So thank you, and welcome to all of you. And this is my small take. I'm not a supply chain expert, but I definitely am an engineer. I started my career with Siemens, so and I was doing automation projects at that time. So I do have a sense of all these things. And I think today it's really become center stage. So from the periphery, it has all become center stage. And whether it is in the education industry, whether it's in consumer durables, FMCG, you can see these changes happening everywhere. And all the changes will definitely, it is led by marketing, but I think at the end of the day, the delivery is coming from the supply chain. So we are all closely linked with each other, and technology is the backbone for all these activities. So good luck to all of you, and it's really wonderful to have all of you here today with us. Thank you so much, and I hope you have more and more such debates and discussions. These are the order of the day.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing such insightful words with all of us.
After those encouraging words from our director, Dr. Monica Khanna, let us now proceed with the keynote speech. We feel privileged to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker for today's event, Mr. Rohit Bhat. Mr. Rohit currently holds the position of the Vice President of Supply Chain Operations at Razelink. It is a leading cloud provider of supply chain resilience and risk management intelligence and analytics solutions. Industry leaders like Amgen, GM, and EMC rely on Resilink to mitigate risks end-to-end while achieving long-term competitive advantage and building brand and shareholder value. Mr. Rohit has over 18 years of experience in operations and management and has worked with Resilink for 6 years, analyzing and evaluating operational needs and creating strategies to improve productivity, enhance quality, and improve cost effectiveness. He is an expert on supply chain risk with years of experience in the business world to back it up. We are so delighted to have you among us today, sir, and we request you to kindly share your thoughts with the audience.
Okay. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to first start off by thanking the organizing committee and Somaiya Institute of Management for giving me this opportunity to address in this keynote conference. As I'll get started, I'll try to first share. I'd like to share something, if that is okay.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
I think it's disabled.
We'll just give you the sharing rights. Just a second. Yeah, sir. You can go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Just take a quick minute. My screen coming up okay?
Yes, sir. We can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Do you see the document or
we can see the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get right on it. Supply chain has been in the news. Some would argue the supply chain is the news currently. But if you look at supply chain in particular, supply chains has been around for centuries, right? If you look at from the medieval times to olden ages, from the architecture to the clothing, the trade routes that we had, humanity has relied on supply chains to enrich their life. It's therefore also fair to say that supply chain risk has also have been humanity's oldest living problem. I start off with this small little poem, right? I'm sure every one of us have at some point or the other seen or heard this poem. When I was in early school, my teacher had given me her interpretation of this poem, right? For want of a nail, a shoe was lost. Something on the lines of a stitch in time saves line. Many eminent personalities have used this in their literary works. I have my own interpretation of this. For me, as a supply chain professional, looking, being in the industry, looking at how the last few years have unfolded, I think this poem is very apt. My interpretation of this is essentially the earliest documented case of a multi-tier supply chain disruption. From emanating from someone who's at a tier 4 or tier 5 supplier supplying a nail to his customer who's required to service the horse, who's required to ensure that the horse is available for his customer to go into battle. Eventually, a lot of these knights, these companies could not really make it to battle, probably because everyone were relying on this 4th tier supplier to supply the nail to his equipment, and the battle being lost. The anecdote here being, the analogy here being the customer, you lose your customer, you lose your reputation, and so on and so forth. So multi-tier supply chain risk is the oldest problem that humanity has faced, and we see that it continues. If you need any further proof, here are some data points that you have. Some background into this data set. This data comes from Razelink Event Watch AI, right? Event Watch AI is one of the most comprehensive supply chain disruption monitoring and reporting services. The data from Event Watch AI and the trends year on year say that supply chain disruptions, it's not only started with the pandemic, it's predated the pandemic. If you see some of the charts, a big long line right in the middle points to the human health. Those are the news and events that we cover as part of the human health or the pandemic related disruptions that we observe globally, starting with the first one in January 4th, when we reported a pneumonia-like virus in Wuhan. But startling, as you see, is the factory fires, right? They have been rising, they have always been high. But what is startling is the number of factory fires that have been occurring in the last 1 year alone. In the last 6 months, we've reported almost 863 cases of factory fires. Some of these have a relation to pandemic or the COVID-induced lockdowns and employee restrictions in workplaces and factory floors. A lot of companies had to limit the number of employees that they could have, and their focus therefore was ensuring to have the people to get in production to get the products out. Our research shows that this really impacted some of the preventative maintenance work, the compliance audit, the removal of debris around the work area that really resulted in this incidence of factory fires that overall resulted in disruptions. There's been a lot of extreme weather events that we have witnessed over the past 6 months, most notably the Texas polar vortex freeze that really brought petrochemical companies and thereby the entire plastic polymer supply chains to almost a grinding halt due to a lot of force majeure that these petrochemical companies started issuing. Then there has been droughts and wildfires that have raged in the US West Coast, and also extreme weather and heat waves in and around the Mediterranean, Europe, Canada, wildfires, and something that is very notable and important is the drought in Taiwan, which impacts the significantly water, the wafer fabs that rely significantly on massive amounts of water. So all of these states that supply chain disruptions are here to stay. They have always been there, and we have, as supply chain, and this is the life that a supply chain practitioner has to face in ensuring that he is running a very resilient supply chain. A little background on the Event Watch and the Event Watch AI. Is there a question? Okay. All right. Event Watch is our
Ayush Agarwal, please put yourself on mute.
If there's no question, I will proceed. Okay. So Event Watch is a premier supply chain monitoring and disruption notification tool. When we started Event Watch a decade or so back, we were covering a limited number of industries, primarily covering events around weather disruptions, factory fires, and a very small list of events. But over the years, after receiving a lot of feedback from some of our customers, we really expanded the scope of Event Watch. We invested significantly in technology, brought in a lot of these AI and ML technologies, NLP, to really expand the scope. Event Watch AI today covers screens over 4.3 million data sources from syndicated news, open news sources, social media coverage, etc., and generates about close to 5.5 million news feeds and data points each day. All of this is across over 100 different languages, and then we have got AI models that would then parse through all of this feed and then identify and clear out redundancies, identify key entities, key relationship, and narrow it down to the very small vital few events and incidents that have a potential to disrupt a company's supply chain. These events are then notified to our customers through our solution, and these supply chain impacting events are what we have captured here in the year-on-year graph. So what is it that we are witnessing today is essentially a perfect storm, a black swan, perhaps a black swan of black swan events. If we just look at last year, just about anything and everything that could go wrong from a supply chain perspective has indeed gone down. Our data shows that these disruptions affected record number of industries, all of which experienced massive surges in shortages, price increases of raw materials, allocations, lines down, and cash flow problems. Of course, a lot of customers were impacted. A lot of these problems emanated essentially due to the on again, off again nature of restrictions around COVID-19 worldwide. The already cloudy demand picture was not helped by these reopening activities. When COVID-19 actually first started, a lot of companies had to retool, adjust to the varying nature and demand, had to retool their manufacturing, their distribution network, their processes to now cater to smaller packet sizes, because a lot of companies, restaurants, schools were shut, and the demand that was coming was in actually smaller packet sizes coming directly from the consumers. When the first stage of the lockdowns were restricted, were lifted, it kind of rebalanced the demand, so to say. But then came the Delta variant and forcing another round of shutdowns, shutting down schools, delaying the return to office plans, and then companies that were just readjusting back into the larger package sizes, larger demand signals, had to almost readjust real time to cater to the new demand signals that were coming. This defied a lot of all the historical trends that planning systems have and planners have relied on. So this brought in a new level of uncertainty. In the US, even today, we are witnessing significant labor shortages. As a result of COVID, trade wars, regulatory environment, etc., there is a lot of the US government is promoting a lot of onshore manufacturing and is investing in a lot of factory infrastructure. But the reality that we see today and we hear from our customers is that we are actually struggling to fill in our factories with workers today, or even to transport material to cater on time, to cater to the present demand. Then we have the container shortages. Post-COVID, a lot of stay-at-home kids, work personnel, ensured that there has been a surging demand in consumer electronics. There has been a significant increase in imports into the West from Asia. What it created is significant cargo freight, ocean freight from Asia into the West. And what we are seeing now is a very skewed container disruption. Right? On the US West Coast, we can see ports that have got empty containers that are piled up. While if you go to the east into the ports in China, that's piling up with finished goods that is waiting to be shipped. But there is no way to ship because there's no containers to put them in. Then we had the Suez Canal blockage that added to the already constrained ocean freight. We continue to see significant delays in handling of container traffic in ports, essentially due to COVID restrictions around personnel, the significant backlog, older systems, and all in all, this is creating significant blockages and delays in shipping. At this juncture, what we have seen is companies that could actually afford or could, in the light of these freight delays, ocean freight delays, if they could afford to fly in their products, they started to expedite through air cargo. But now some of the existing routes for air cargo, which is usually taken up by premium semiconductor, high value semiconductor supplies, now they were winding up for capacity, leading to further and more delays. The perfect storm, as you can see, the result, as you see on the right, it summarizes what we have seen as a result of this perfect storm. This has resulted in cost increases, delivery problems, profit warnings, inability to serve customers, and companies actually putting their customers on allocation. So these are the implications that we have seen, and these are the implications of what happens when supply chains go down. Worst case, it can lead to companies going bankrupt, companies issuing force majeures, and in certain industries like healthcare or life sciences, patient life and well-being, so to say, gets impacted. One of the shortages of our present lifetime, or our lifetime, the semiconductor shortages. Right? I'd like to dwell a little bit based on what we have seen, our experience and the data that we are seeing. We believe this is here to stay, at least for some time. It's not going to get solved. But where did this all start, right? When COVID happened in 2020 early and forced a series of lockdowns across the world, a lot of companies, a lot of auto companies made some panic PO cancellations, as many companies expected their demand to go down significantly. Then they lost their spot to all these consumer electronics companies who booked in the available capacity as a result of consumers buying into laptops, computers, gaming consoles, gym equipment, etc. Once the early restrictions were lifted, what was not expected is the demand for auto came back in surging, and that really put in the semiconductors supply chain, which is already constrained. Most semiconductor companies and suppliers have 16 to 18-week lead times at best, and most wafer fabs we know run at peak capacity, almost at 95%. So this brought in significant levels of disruption into semiconductors. Semiconductors, as we know, is there in every product and has a presence today in everything that we touch, from consumer electronics to auto to IoT. So this is now a very significant disruption. We also hear companies and countries who, because of this disruption, are planning to add semiconductor capacities. But all that this has done is, in fact, create a bigger demand for semiconductors. Now, the semiconductor equipment lead times are out by 12 months. Guess what? The semiconductor equipment also need semiconductors, right? So that's why we say semiconductor shortages are here to stay. The product that really powers human experience as we know it, the digital world as we know it. If we continue to see these disruptions, we believe that it will set us back in our innovation trajectory by several years. Now, if you were in some of the companies as a supply chain professional, you really thought you got lucky and were able to secure your supply chain for semiconductor products. That's not the end of the road. There are significant other shortages in chemicals, in polymers, wood pallets for packaging and logistics, right? And we continue to see constraints and allocations. So how do you plan this? How do you prepare yourself for this? How did we get here? For the last several years, in fact, for a better part of the last 10 to 20 years, and for most of the last 6 years that I have been working with my customers, hearing about how they plan, a lot of procurement teams, supply chain practitioners, the prime focus has always been on cost reduction, right? This really brought in lean technologies just in times and drove down inventory levels to a significant level. The single-minded focus on reducing cost and thereby return shareholder value actually meant that there were certain companies that did not really invest in capabilities that could bring in a certain level of information, intelligence, and insights that could bring in some level of resiliency in their supply chain. We have also seen, and our data suggests that post the early stage, right, of the pandemic, when the supply shortages actually really started to flare up, some of these companies actually ditched their just-in-times, their lean methodologies, and actually started hoarding up on inventory, suspecting another disruption which would come. So this, adding of the inventory and hoarding of the inventory results in several hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in pent-up inventory, right? So if the lack of information towards resilience and bringing down inventory levels, if you think that was a mistake, hoarding up inventory, thinking that we will save ourselves, we will stay ahead of the game on account of these disruption is also, in my view, a problem, right? Supply chains, they power our lives. The risk in the supply chain is when we cannot sustain operations and deliver consistent results from our supply chain. And that has got massive financial consequences. The only way out, in my view, is to bring in information and intelligence to power your supply chain decision making. So we've all looked at the problem. We know that this is here to stay one way or the other. So how do we equip ourselves and plan to bring in systems, tools, and technologies? We start off by first looking into the nature of our supply chains. When we speak to customers, when we onboard customers, speak to them, we see some of the information the customers already know. A supply chain is usually very layered, right? There are your suppliers from whom you procure products from. These suppliers in turn use other suppliers to get certain raw materials, parts. There are contract manufacturers. There's a distribution line, and so on and so forth. So one of the key things in the path towards getting information, the intelligence, is to having this knowledge of your supply chain, which is essentially knowing what are the products that you have, who are the suppliers, who are the tier one suppliers, who are your direct suppliers or indirect suppliers, so to say, that you use in ensuring that these products are out of your factories. How many contract manufacturers that they use? Who are your sub-tier suppliers? Where are their sites? Do you have information on their recovery time, right? This is the kind of information that we believe is needed to start off with. This is what we traditionally call as supply chain mapping. The second information that you would need as a practitioner would be information around disruptions occurring across the globe. Right? Sorry. So why is this important? Is because what we see is, as you dwell deeper into your supply chain, the visibility drops significantly. When we onboard new customers, I receive when they provide their list of suppliers, we see, my experience tells me, and when I interview them, they tell me that they have fairly decent level of, say, about 70 to 80% of visibility into hundreds of their tier one suppliers. They have about 70 to 80% visibility into some known risks, like a sourcing risk, solvency or financial risk, location risk, what is the recovery times. But then there are a lot of other risks that they don't really track. Then there is the remaining 25%, which is still unaccounted for, right? So this is just for their tier one suppliers. As we go and lower and look for the suppliers lower down tier two and lower, our customers realize that it is fairly alarming that they have lesser and lesser visibility and untimely less control over the risk. So that's where the mapping exercise really needs to start, is to get this information of your tier one suppliers, their locations, and then collect information of sub-tier and so on. If you think that the worst is really over, no, it's not. Disruptions, supply chains have been disrupted over the years, and they continue, and I think they will continue to be. Perhaps because the future is so unbound, most likely the worst supply chain disruption is probably ahead of us. So it all boils down, therefore, to having intelligence and data for us to take effective actions more proactively and more predictively. Excuse me. Excuse me. So, aside from the lack of visibility, there is also another critical issue. There are time and personal constraints when you have to go assessing your supplier risks, and therefore supplier risk assessments are therefore only limited to the top 20% of your direct suppliers where you run the most number of transactions. We already know that this exposes companies to blind spots, because 80% of the risk really emanates from the lower tiers. So how do we go about doing this mapping? And what really is the supply chain mapping that we are referring to? When some companies rely on data on their suppliers, which are available in public sources. It's a good start. A lot of companies do publish their locations, their offices, their factory location, but it usually ends up creating a lot of noise. When we work with these with some of the companies, we see that there is very little information on core manufacturing sites. Most times that the data, when our research teams looks at the data that the customer has provided, they realize that these are not really the manufacturing locations, right? These would be office addresses or or addresses where you can bill them to. Offices, perhaps in the Valley, in the US or in UK. But the real production, the real manufacturing of these components might be happening in Taiwan and China, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So you really need to make sure that the information, the manufacturing information is coming from your suppliers. And that's where you need to have this ecosystem where and the systems in place where you have an ability to collaborate and work with your suppliers so that they can provide secure information securely about their supply chains. When we start our journey with our customers, mind you, these are some of the largest customers in their industry, some billion-dollar, several billion-dollar companies. When we start off, these are companies that have hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers. Where we start off is by starting off by mapping their suppliers and their sites. We then go about going to the direct suppliers and collecting information of the suppliers that they use, and then the sites that their sub-tier suppliers would be using to service them or to provide materials to them. As we grow on in this relationship, our customers realize the value in this information and are able to work with their suppliers. There is a little bit of effort that is needed here, but as you go up the value chain and then you start collecting, part-to-site mapping, which essentially is information where the BOM components, the parts which go into your products, where is each of this part coming from? How many suppliers do I rely on to get this part? Where are their manufacturing locations? What are my suppliers? Rather, where are their suppliers? Where in the world do they source their materials from? What is their shipping routes, right? What is the recovery time for these sites, right? And you finally go into building this and bringing in a lot of business continuity plan from these suppliers. And that's where the real value comes in. At a minimum, we always advocate that all single source and sole source parts used in high revenue products, they need to be covered under the mapping. These are where the sourcing risks are high, has a direct impact to revenue, right? So this is, very pertinent and interesting. The data that we sometimes receive from our companies and what we have seen in reality from the past several years, the focus usually has been on the high spend, right? As procurement professionals, you want to focus on your high spend. It's usually 20% of your suppliers contribute to 80% of your spend. It's not unusual for us to receive the initial data set of from customers who have thousands of suppliers. We already know that. And when they provide us a small set and we ask them to give us more information on these suppliers, they say, hey, I'm going to be focusing on my high spend suppliers. These are the top 20% of the suppliers that are contributing to 80% of the spend. I would like to start here. This is where we actually talk with these companies and tell them to look not really at spend, but by revenue impact. What do we mean by revenue impact? Is to look at the products that have that bring in significant revenue. There are looking at parts that go into the making of these products, looking at suppliers that go into the making of these high revenue products, and to prioritize their risk, their visibility and mapping exercises from there. There has been significant examples that we can quote where a lot of supply chains have been disrupted, not by some of your high spend suppliers, but risk emanating from these smaller spend, 80% of the suppliers that contribute to the smaller spend, right? We don't really need to look really far. News that has been open worldwide in 2020, post-COVID, healthcare and hospital supply chain were disrupted and came down because of lack of PPEs, the personal protective equipment, the masks, the gowns, the gloves. They only constitute 3 to 5% of spend of the entire hospital supply chain, but it was the PPEs that hospitals really struggled in. Then there is the Asahi Casey incident. I encourage all students to look up and read about the Asahi Casey Microsystems and the fire in their Japan factory that happened in October 2020. Right? This factory is the one that Asahi Casey uses to manufacture large-scale integrated chips that are used in a lot of audio devices, car stereos, oscillators, and a lot of other consumer electronics. Asahi Casey is the leader and has over 90% plus market share in these chipsets, and a lot of suppliers rely on these ICs as part of their BOM products. So what it was very interesting, right, for us witnessing this, because our companies who had visibility into this, into this issue as it was unfolding, had mapped Asahi in our systems. When we reported this news out first, remember, and if you look it up, perhaps if you may be able to look at the timing differences. This news first broken in a local language website, not very popular. It never really came to any of the mainstream English websites, news websites early on. It took several hours before this news actually came in the mainstream websites. When we reported this, this resulted in immediate response from a lot of our companies. Companies that did not have information of this event or got news of the Asahi KC fire that burning, were left to pick up the pieces, so to say, because companies that had this information were already going to distributors and what have you to pick up whatever inventory was left. And these chipsets, which normally would be a few cents to a few dollars, now was commanding over $20 in the market. That's several 1,000% increase in a raw material price. Look what it would do to your profitability of the products to which it goes into. What is also very interesting is about a month or so from when this factory fire occurred in the Asahi factory in Japan, they actually issued an advisory to all of their customers to look for alternates, as they expected that it would not be before 2022 that they would be able to come all the way back up again. That is something that I really urge you guys, students, enthusiasts, to just look it up. A very present, very relatable issue that we have seen. So, what is so once you have this information, right? There is really two approaches that you then need to work on to ensure your supply chains are protected. The first one is a news and alert-based workflow, where you have systems. What we do is we have Event Watch AI that notifies customers of disruptions that we pick up from social media, from public news sources, and report them as soon as we get them. That is the timely notification of a disruption. But that news is only relevant, so to say, if you know that you have sites in that specific region, you have a supply chain in that specific region. So that's where the mapping really comes in, right? For example, when if you go back to the example of the early days of COVID, Event Watch was able to pick up a pneumonia-like virus being reported in social media chatter in local news events, in social media chatter in local language. I'm sorry. We started monitoring this on, I think it was on the 27th or the 28th of December, and we kept monitoring this news. And on the 4th of January 2020 is when we initially notified our customers as a high impact event, and we actually sent geofence the entire Wuhan area and sent a notification out to our customers that this is an incident that we are tracking that has potential for serious disruptions. A lot of companies that I worked with, they benefited significantly A lot of companies started setting in their own war rooms, relied extensively on the data from their mapping, from the news sources. Scenario plannings were being done to get ahead of this as much as possible. Remember, what started just in Wuhan, it really spread across the world. Germany, France, USA, India, and every other country. Prior to this, most disruptions have been largely local, right? The worst disruptions have been the tsunami and the Fukushima incident in Japan, Thailand for floods, some capacitor shortages. These have been localized events, right? The playbooks that a lot of companies might have created was essentially the reactionary playbook was to secure alternate supplies from an alternate source, to shore up inventory, and so on and so forth. But with the global nature of this pandemic, unless you really have your suppliers mapped and you're tracking where your supply chains are, which are the neighborhoods that are getting impacted by the lockdowns, unless you have invested in these capabilities, it definitely puts you at risk to an imminent disruption. The value that you have in having all of this information is essentially you can now be really proactive. You can now benchmark your suppliers. You can collect more. You can scorecard your suppliers, identify the different risks, plot those risks. May it be financial, geopolitical, location-related risk. ESG, a hot topic presently, which is sustainability, environment, governance, or even cybersecurity. You run these assessments with your with suppliers, get information on their cybersecurity preparedness, on their hurricane preparedness, and have a system where you can actually collate all this information, quantify, score, and rate these risks. Right? This is where we have the proactive supply chain. Right? Investments in technology, in information, bringing in collaboration tools that allow you to work with your suppliers real time, work with your suppliers real time to get more information on disruptions as they occur. I think this is what is our recommendation, and this is where supply chains will bring in the information and the intelligence to really take informed decisions. So what's in it for the practitioners, right? What does success really looks like, right? Remember, this is a journey. You don't just invest in a technology, identify a partner like us, perhaps, that has been doing this for years, and expect to be resilient overnight. No, that does not happen, right? You start off, let's look at companies that believe they don't have this information, this live monitoring and disruption system. They will invest a few hundred or of thousands of dollars in bringing in this monitoring system. Right now, from a state where you are really reactive, you are now aware of some of the disruptions that would occur in your supply chain, in and around your supply chain. This visibility over a period of time will result in several thousands, if not millions, in dollar saving. And as you work up the maturity curve, you really start collaborating and working with your suppliers, building a transparent ecosystem where suppliers actually start providing more information, and you start rating, scoring, prioritizing them. Significant value that we see is when you actually bring in multi-tier mapping that we talked about. This is where the ROI starts to climb significantly. This is where instead of paying a premium, a $20 premium on a part that costs a few cents, you are able to eliminate this distress spend almost entirely. This is where the ROI really starts, starts to kick in. The data that we have suggests that in the last quarter alone, right, companies have spent in excess of 100 to 150 million in just freight expedites. And if you think about it, supply chains having, cost of risk in several hundred millions, if not billions of dollars. Having a risk program, investing in information, even though you start small, but if you start growing in your maturity, what we have seen is companies are able to realize, significant values of cost savings year on year. If you talk about hundreds of millions in risk, even if you're able to save half of this because of our because of the information that we have, because of the proactive systems that we put in year on year, that is significant dollars saved, right? That is what brings value and returns to your shareholders. So the focus that we advocate is on change management, be more proactive, bring in information and the intelligence in your supply chain by monitoring, mapping, and stay ahead of the next disruption, so to say, and to be able to take informed decisions and source before anyone else. This really has been Resilinc's mission, which is to make global supply chains resilient, sustainable, fair, and secure. We have the systems and the technology that offers end-to-end supply chain supplier performance management solutions, early warning notifications, and really what we call the LinkedIn of supply chain. Right. So with that, I would like to end. Supply chains have shaped our world, right? We have humanity, as I started off, humanity has always relied on supply chains to enrich their lives. Supply chain disruptions are here to stay. What is it that can bring us, what is it that we need is to bring in that information and intelligence to power our decision making. To all the budding students and potential practitioners, who would want to venture into the supply chain space out there, it's the, we believe it's the best ever time to be in supply chain. Of course, we have witnessed the mother of all disruptions the past 2 years. but what we have been talking for the last decade or so has been a need to be resilient, a need to improve maturity, need to get information. The pandemic only proved that information in silos, information in spreadsheet and in a practitioner's head is not something that you can rely on. Pandemic only proved that if you don't have the information, if you only focus on inventory and cost reduction, you are sure to get disrupted. A lot of our companies have who have invested in bringing up these capabilities have been able to significantly minimize the risk in their supply chain. So for students, I urge you to take on this this challenge. Supply chains are going to get complex. Disruptions will continue. And as you venture into supply chain, know that we will look forward to ideas, contributions, and to challenge status quo, so to say. What we've been doing, we look forward to your insights and expertise as well, to really set the supply chain for the future. With that, I conclude my speech or address, so to say, and I can open it up now if there are any questions.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing such valuable insights, sir, and everything that you talked about disruption management and the role of AI and ML and information and intelligence in mitigating risks end to end. I'm sure the audience was delighted to hear your thoughts, and as we have received a ton of questions, so me and Tanya will direct a few of them towards you right now.
Sure.
The first question that we have here is, sir, that how has AI helped us reduce supply chain risks? And are there any new technologies or processes that are being implemented at Razelink?
Sure. Great question to start off with. Yeah. So what we had seen when we started off Event Watch, as we say, right, we were relying on information that we were gathering and collecting with very little investments in technology. Some numbers that we talked about was very important. We are looking, disruptions that can occur anywhere. The news that sources are some of the most prominent news sources that we know of, they're all English news sources. They are the major newspapers don't really cover disruptions that occur in a remote factory location, say in Vietnam. The local language news sites is one that actually covers this. So if you really have to stay ahead of disruptions and get information on time, you now have to collect information from news sources, social media, and every language possible from every country or location where you have your supply chain presence. That's a ton of work. That's a lot of data to collect, parse, and generate intelligence out of. So that's where we need to rely on AI, ML, natural language processing, to be able to collect all of this data, parse this information. There is a significant amount of noise that gets generated when we collect this information. If you don't employ technologies like AI, it's just not possible to get the intelligence out. You will be spending inordinate amount of time just trying to make sense from the noise, right? There is significant returns personal savings, resource costs, just because you're now relying on AI to bring you timely information on events and impacts. Event Watch is just one of the solutions that we refer to. The suite of solutions that Razelink has been working on with our customers. We have a lot of AI ML based solutions. We have Commodity Watch AI that actually leverages to a small extent the Event Watch, and then brings in AI models that is now able to correlate entity relationship, bring in hundreds of different variables that impact commodity prices, that shape commodity demand and supply, and gives us information around several commodities like gold, aluminum, copper, even paper, so to say, for that matter. So we use technology to first get in, to look into the historical data, use the models to identify patterns, identify the variables that we see can create a demand and a supply fluctuation, which in turn might result in a price fluctuation upward or downward, and are able to come up with insights into commodity pricing. Then there is, we have several other predictive models that we have built under disruptions. Weather Watch AI is one which focuses specifically on weather, used extensively by retail chains, where they would want to know what is my threshold where I need to shut my retail store in New York. Normally, a heavy rain may not really disrupt a lot of industries, but if you're a retail store, you need to know what are those thresholds that you need to shut. So it's a separate solution because the thresholds here are different, and to rely on geographical and weather-related information from across the globe and identifying and bringing up these thresholds which are pertinent locally. Again, there is AI that you need. A lot of other predictive models in predicting the nature of your PO delays. Then there is something that we are very excited that is coming in the future that will help bring in transportation routes and so on and so forth. That's what we are working on.
Okay, so thank you, sir. Tanya can take up the next question.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing such insights with us. So the next question we have for you is, once risk is identified, what procedure do you suggest for quantifying the risk? With quantification, do you advise optimization methods also?
Good. Good questions. So when you identify the risk, it's very important to know what is the risk, right? The risk can emanate from, there can be financial risk, location risk, there could be regulatory risk, compliance, cybersecurity. Identification of the risk is important. Now, you cannot really look at it in isolation. You have to look at your supply chain and be able to bring in this information, and to be able to actually rate or rank the risk, so that you can look at suppliers across and be able to rate them in, so to say, in a weighted scale, right? So having that system to prioritize which supplier has the risk and which is the risk that I need to mitigate is also important. There may be risks that maybe you can live with. Must be a very small, must be a supplier for which you have got you might have a risk where a supplier does not have any alternate sites, relies on a single site for supplying materials. So and has a very high recovery time. So he might show up very high in the recovery risk and continuity risk. But maybe this is a very commonly available part, and you already have 4 other alternate suppliers from where you source from. Do you really want to mitigate this risk? No. So you need to first have a system where you are able to bring all these risk elements together and juxtapose it and look at it across your supply chain. Once you identify and prioritize the risk, once you identify, you then prioritize, look at the elements of risk that have key impact to your supply chain. That is when you start to work on it. The way we quantify it in our system is looking at risk from a 1 to 10 score, 10 being the highest risk, and 1 is where there's low risk. Right? Once the risk has been identified, there are various collaboration tools. We encourage our customers to work with their suppliers in minimizing that risk. If it is, if I take a similar issue, let's say it's a supplier that does not have an alternate site, or let's say if it's a supplier from where you really cannot do dual sourcing, you really rely on that supplier and he just supplies you from one location, you work with the supplier to see if he can supply from an alternate location, if he has those capabilities. If not, you see if he can improve on his business continuity processes. Right? There is no one solution, but you systematically look at the risk, identify the possible ways of mitigation, work with your suppliers, and try to eliminate that risk before that risk starts to bite you.
Okay, sir. Yeah. So we would like to conclude the keynote speech here, sir. Thank you for so much insights on the supply chain disruption management.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Supply chains today are closely tied up with globalization. With extended supply chains, uncertainty and risks have increased exponentially, particularly after the COVID pandemic. Hence, the resiliency in supply chain becomes paramount. And companies like Razelink help other organizations to manage their risks and become more resilient. So thank you very much, Rohit, sir, for this exhilarating talk, which has set the base for the proceedings to come. We would now like to... Sorry, sir.
Sure. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, you too.
I'm sure there are some eminent speakers in the queue. Thank you.
We would now like to present you with a memento as well, sir, as a token of our gratitude, which will be delivered to you very soon.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on, it is with immense pleasure we present to you all our chief guest for this year's Gscm, Professor Sachin Kamplay. Dr. Sachin Kamplay is a professor of digital transformation, operations and strategy at EDHEC Business School, France. He holds a PhD in management, MBA in operations, and bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from reputed Indian universities. He has been associated with various institutions of repute, such as NITI Mumbai and Karnataka University in India. He has over 27 years of consulting experience with leading manufacturing organizations like GSK Pharmaceuticals, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, ACC Cements, Times Group, and many other prominent firms. He is listed in the top 2% of researchers globally, and he is one of the top 5 researchers in France. He has received the Best Research Paper Award in 2016 and 2012. We are delighted to have you amongst us, sir, and we request you to kindly share your thoughts and experiences.
Thank you,
Meanwhile,
Tanya.
we request the audience to pose their questions, if any, in the chat box and direct them towards the Q&A POCs. Yeah, you can go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Tanya, and a very good morning to all of you, all the participants on this platform joining for this conference. And before I start, maybe I should also thank the organizing committee, the conference chair, for providing me an opportunity to be here this morning and share my experiences on supply chain disruption. So I take this opportunity today to present one of my research paper. I'll share the screen. Okay, so just confirm whether this screen is visible.
Yes, sir. We can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So just mentioning that I take this opportunity to present one of my research paper. And this paper is on the theme of this particular conference, and it's highly relevant to understand, like, say, how the companies in the world have reacted to the disruption of COVID-19. And we see that it's not the end, it's still continuing. And recently, the outbreak of Omicron is again, like, say, puzzling these industries. And it's just, like, say, going to be much more challenging for them in the future. Many countries in Europe has already announced lockdown and, like, say, the restrictions coming back into place. So I continue with on to share my experience with the disruptions that has disrupted the supply chain. And specifically, we're going to talk about the disruptions that has occurred to two industries. That's the automobile and the airline industry. So this is going to be the flow of presentation for the session today. So first I'll be introducing to you about what the study is all about and some brief on the literature review. I'm not going to make it more theoretical or more academic based. It's going to be more of the experience sharing, and that's going to be coming from these two industries. The methodology that we have adopted to study how the companies are reacting to this situation. And then I share you with the analysis and the findings. And then actually at the end, we'll be proposing a supply chain resilience framework, which could be used by the companies. And then we have the recommendations. Now, this is the details of the paper, and I'll be sharing immediately after this talk, this paper with you, the link. And this paper is free for you to access, and then you can find more details if you feel that you're interested to know more about this topic. Okay, so this is something which is not new to us now, because we have been listening to this, we have been reading it in many different mediums, and we ourselves have been, like, say, the victims of this disruption at a personal level. The pandemic effect, what we refer is to this COVID-19 impact. Okay, so it was first identified in one city of China. It has affected millions of people in terms of their livelihood, in terms of their health, in terms of their life. The government response strategies that has been displayed to this pandemic effect has been the lockdowns, the social distancing norms, the use of masks, and the border closures. When it comes to supply chain, COVID-19 has impacted very high on the different supply chains. Okay, so it's both the manufacturing and the services industries. And this has majorly come because that's basically, I'm referring to the manufacturing industries. This disruption has basically come because of high dependence of many countries on China. And it was first the China wherein, like, this COVID was identified, and the first closures and the lockdowns happened in China, and then it had an contagion effect onto the different countries and the supply chains of different businesses. Now, this has impacted very badly, and this has posed challenges to the practitioners to come out with the response strategies and be in line with the current situations. Now, the motivation for this particular study, when our team decided to take some work on this particular topic, okay, so we basically wanted to provide some assessments on the supply chain resilience, because the previous literature wherein, like say, we could see a lot of things on the supply chain disruptions, but then we couldn't find the appropriate strategies the companies could be using, because many of the studies, they focus more on, like say, what is supply chain disruptions and how it has happened, or, or what type of impacts it has had on the supply chains. But then there were very few, like say, which actually assessed the resilience of the companies, and also they focused on the different strategies these companies could be using or the supply chains could be using. And actually, there were no empirical studies or empirical supports. Many of the papers were theoretical based, or it was the simple case studies. So with that motivation and the research gaps, we thought that, okay, this is the right area and the right motivation to conduct a research and present our findings to the world, so that it could be beneficial for these different supply chains to think on, like, so what different strategies, the response strategies are available, and if at all if required, how they could be measuring the supply chain resilience. Now, we had two research questions. The first research question was, like, say, the level of resilience, okay, of these two supply chains, the manufacturing and the service supply chains, against the COVID-19 outbreak. So what is the level of resilience? Okay, so what impact this pandemic has had on these two supply chains? Okay, and whether these two supply chains, the manufacturing and the service supply chains, would be able to recover from this impact. Then, as I told you, there were no mitigation or the response strategies available to manage these disruptions. And therefore, we wanted to present the supply chain practitioners with some short-term and long-term risk mitigation strategies, which are being displayed and being used by the different practitioners across these supply chains. Now, something with regards to the background literature. Okay, so this basically is talking about the impact this COVID-19 has had on the supply chains. So, a research by NAM USA in 2020, they reported that 78% of the companies in the world, that's in specific to USA, had a financial impact on the supply chains. Okay, and PwC in a study in 2020, they mentioned about disastrous impact on the supply chains in the US and Mexico. Also, this PwC report reported that, like, say, not just the US and Mexico, but then the companies across the supply chains across East Asia, Europe to USA, all were disrupted. Okay, and it's because these countries' supply chains are worldwide. Okay, their suppliers are based in different parts of the world. Okay, this has had an supply chain contagion effect spreading across each region. Now, coming to the impact on the automobile sector. Okay, so the impact, because if, as you have seen, the topic has dealt two important sectors, the automobile and the airline. So let's try to understand what impact this COVID-19 has had on the automobile sector. So here are a few of the listings of the impacts taken from the actual factual data. So it has so we know that automobile is a very important sector or an industry which contributes highly towards the country's GDP, and it's one of the sector which creates a high level of employment, maybe almost 19% of the total population. When I talk about an automobile sector, it's just not the companies which are going to produce the cars, okay, or the final products. I am referring here also the ancillaries and the service industries associated with the automobile sector. So, referring to UK, so the UK's annual turnover, it's 82 billion pound, okay, and then to this economy, like, say, the contribution from this industry is almost 18.6 billion pounds. That's coming from the automobile sector. When this COVID impact was witnessed, many companies, they started downsizing their workforce. There were closure of the showrooms because of the lockdowns. many of the site operations, okay, they were closed. Like say the expansion plans of many automobile companies, they were stalled. The employees were reduced, as I told, the workforce downsizing. The sales in UK declined by almost 89%. There was a Mazda Toyota joint venture, which was happening in terms of a new production facility. And that was worth 1.6 billion. That venture got closed. Ford Motor Company, they had in a Detroit train station, they had taken a facility to come out with a service center. That was closed. And General Motor had to slow down its production. And many companies across this world was like say had to downsize their operations. They had to close their facilities, and that's like say the production had to be stopped. And that was mainly because of the new norms coming in terms of the temperature screening, the wearing of the medical grade mask, and the social distancing and other things. Now, coming to the impact of COVID-19 on the airline industry. Now, again, we know that this industry is a labor intensive industry. And when I talk about an airline industry, it's just not about the people and the staff working in an airline company. Okay. It's a result, it's a research coming from a study which says that for every one job lost in the airline industry, there are other 7 dependent jobs which are going to be lost in its allied industries, or 7.5 jobs. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that, like say, the airline industry has given support to many other allied industries which are dependent on the entire industry. For example, we talk about the hotel industry. Okay, because we know that the more the people are going to travel, okay, the more the need for the hotels and the lodging and the boarding facilities. Okay, and we know that when it comes to a hotel is also a labor intensive industry. Okay, if the airline, if the people are not able to move, if the people are not able to travel, in that case, the hotel bookings are not going to happen. If the hotel bookings are not going to happen, then the impact is going to be again on the closure of the hotels and the downsizing of the employees. So that is what the connection we have of the airline industry with the other industries in the hospitalization sector. Now, this sector also witnessed a significant job loss of almost like say 7 to 13%, and this is the figures which I'm referring of the year 2020. Okay, that's around September 2020. Many big airline companies, they had to announce job cuts, and the unpaid leave regime started. And this impact basically had impact, as I told you, on the other sectors. And therefore, we thought that, okay, this automobile and the airline industry are going to be the best candidates for our study, because they just don't represent a specific sector in our society, but then they are basically the indicators of the economy of a country. So both being supply chains which are complex and dynamic, and they are capital and the labor intensive, okay, and involve many dependent ancillaries, we thought that this is what is going to be the right candidates for our study. There were certain industries wherein, like say, CRISIL in 2020 had mentioned does have a very low resilience towards this impact. And in their study, they had identified gems and jewelry, steel, real estate, automobile, and airline industry. So that again supported our thought process that yes, these are the two industries which have low resilience, and then maybe it would be very interesting for us to know about how they are coping out with the challenges of COVID-19. The CRISIL report had again mentioned that there are some industries which has high resilience and they're not going to be getting much impacted because of this COVID. And those industries were the fertilizers, the pharmaceuticals, the food, FMCG, and telecom sectors. Okay, so therefore we decided on to move with these two industries and study the disruptions and the resilience and the strategies they would be adopting to overcome this particular situation. Now, exactly what is meant by supply chain resilience? Because we have been using this term, we talk about this term, but what is the actual definition of this term? Okay. So the supply chain's ability to prevent and absorb changes and regain the initial performance level after an unexpected disturbance. That is what is referred to as the supply chain resilience. Okay, so its ability to prevent and absorb changes. The changes caused by different types of supply chain disruptions. Okay, and to hit back, that is basically to gain back the initial performance level. Okay, after the disruption has occurred. Now, how quickly these industries or these companies are able to come back to the normal. That is what is, in simple, the meaning of supply chain resilience. Now, how do we measure the supply chain resilience? Okay, because I just heard for the previous session, one of the question asked by one of the participant was like, say, how do we assess the supply chain resilience? Okay, now there are some modeling approaches. Okay, and we also have some theoretical approaches. Now, what are the different modeling approaches available to measure or assess the supply chain resilience? Okay, so it says that we can model the supply chain resilience assessment on using different metrics. And the researchers have identified 5 key metrics on which we can evaluate the company's performance. And that is the economic ability, the vulnerability of the supply chain, the recovery time, the uncertain situation that's looming around, and the resilience enhancement considerations. That's basically the strategies that are going to be available or going to be implemented by the company to fight the disruption. Now, the performance loss could be also used to measure or maybe to assess the supply chain resilience. Okay, and this performance loss is going to be measured of the supplier's capacity and the service performance. So how well your supplier capacity, or maybe how well your supplier is going to be performing when this recession is going to be happening or it has occurred. Okay, so we're going to make an assessment of how your supplier has been capable enough to provide you the same level of service performance. That is one of the methodology available to assess the supply chain resilience. And we have the recovery time, okay, that the company uses, okay, to reach back to its normal. So the amount of time the company can use to come back, okay, that predictions of this recovery time, that could be a measure of a supply chain resilience. And we can measure it with reference to this recovery time. The theoretical approaches, it says that, okay, instead of measuring the supply chain resilience of a supply chain, better we assess the resilience strategies that's going to be put forth by the companies. Okay, so some theoretical approaches, what they say is that, why do you want to measure the resilience when, like, say, the disruption has already occurred? So why you want to, like, say, know, okay, what has happened? Instead, you see the future. Instead, you see like how you can come back to the normal, and for that, what strategies you're going to put in place. Okay, so that is what a few approaches has been proposed by the researchers. Okay, so it's basically the input-output assessment for different mitigation strategies. Okay, so it basically says that, okay, you evaluate the strategies and then see like how well you can come back to your previous position and make the recovery. We saw the previous literature on the supply chain resilience, and we focused that it was mainly more on the theoretical aspects, and it was exploring more of the enablers, the barriers, the antecedents, the practices, the capabilities of the companies, and so on. So as such, like, say, the empirical studies onto how these companies are reacting, actually, that was not covered. But then, yes, only the difficulties and the challenges that could be there in fighting the supply chain resilience was available to us in the literature. So We can say that, okay, this could be the first of the type of studies which was there in this particular area, wherein, like say, we did a combination of two approaches. That is, we modeled the recovery time as well as we assessed the resilience strategies. So it was a mix of a modeling plus a theoretical approach. Now, when it comes to the supply chain resilience strategies, okay, so there are going to be two categories. One is the proactive strategy, and the other is going to be the reactive strategy. Now, what happens in the proactive strategy is that, like, say, the companies are going to be preparing themselves for the next disruptions. Okay, now that COVID-19 has happened, there has been a lot of disruptions. Okay, now the companies are very much, like, say, alert, and they want to be proactive in the sense, like, say, they want to build an infrastructure which can prevent them from such future disruptions like COVID. The other category of strategy is the reactive strategy. The reactive strategy is that, like, say, now the companies were not that prepared, and then the disruption has occurred, like we see the COVID-19, and how they are reacting to the situation. Okay, so proactive is, like, say, getting yourself prepared for the future disruptions by building a technical or technological based solutions and infrastructure. Whereas the reactive strategy is basically on, at present, how you're reacting to the disruption that has already occurred. So here are a list of proactive strategies that we identified from the literature. And just not the literature, we also interacted with some of the industry experts, and we got to know that, okay, these could be the possible proactive strategies. I'm just going to read it out for you and just give us brief description on what these strategies are all about. So the first one is the digital connectivity, wherein the companies say that, okay, for you to be proactive to the future challenges or the disruptions, you have to build a strong digital infrastructure. Okay, you have to use the different technologies that are available for you, which can predict the future performance, like Internet of Things, blockchain technology, digital twin simulations, not simulation, but there's digital twin for sure. We should go for supply chain automation. Okay, so that is basically we have to systemize the physical and the information workflow. And basically it talks about, again, the digitalization of the supply chain activities and the practices using the digital technologies with reference to digital connectivity. Now, the question of whether we should be localized or we should be regionalized. So basically, like, say, earlier we used to be talking about a globalized sourcing. Okay, but now again, when you talk about a proactive strategy, we are going to again come back to our basics, and that's about, like, say, localization or the regionalization. Because the main lesson what many of the companies have learned this COVID disruption is that, like, say, they were highly dependent on China, and when the China borders got closed, many of the plants across the world, okay, their manufacturing had come to an stop. Okay, so in fact, in terms, like, say, if they could have developed some local suppliers, in that case, they could have just managed to run their business. So this is what the practitioners feel could be one of the proactive strategy. Integrated supply chain risk management system. So it's basically talking about risk sharing across all the supply chains. And again, this is basically an outcome of how digitally connected you are there with your supply chain partners. Supply chain collaboration. Okay, so this is how closely you're going to work together, how closely you're going to work together to see the future challenges that could be coming. Okay, and how well collaboratively you're going to plan about that. Okay, so just not about your company being a manufacturing plant, you're just talking about how would you be able to come out with this disruption, or how you would be able to tackle this disruption. The supplier sitting in some other country, like, say, India, he is independently thinking of how he's going to focus on this disruption. No, so we're going to talk over about, like, the collaboration and the integration aspects of how all these partners can come together and they can collectively plan the future news so that they're not going to be disrupted in the future. And the social supply chain focus, that's the focus on the humanitarian and the social performance. Like, say, how you're going to take your employees into confidence. Okay, this is a proactive strategy because we have seen that abruptly many companies, they have just laid off their employees without any notice, and they were in a very, like say, bad situation. That is what something which you would not like to have as a strategy. Okay, so how proactive you could be with respect to your planning, the manpower planning, and how proactive you could be in seeing to it, like say in future, if such activities are going to again happen. Okay, is there any way, like say, this social focus is going to be there as a priority of your company? So that is like how you're going to take care of your employees, how you're going to win the confidence back of your employees. And finally, we talk about the human capabilities. So that is basically a trained workforce on using the future technologies. Okay, so that's what we refer to as to all the proactive strategies. Now coming to the reactive strategies. Okay, so reactive strategy in the sense, like as I told you, the disruption has already occurred and now you want to react to this particular situation. Okay, now here is basically you just want to have a lifeline maintenance in the sense, like say the transportation should be on, it should be operating, the logistics should be working. So how you could make the logistics working in the sense, like say you're going to ask the government for some respite, you're going to ask some the government to allow the transportation of goods by ship, by that's by sea, by road, or by air, providing them special permissions to move and so on. Big data driven and real-time information system. So basically, you would like to use the big data analytics capabilities. Okay, not the predictive nature at present, but then still you would like to connect yourself with your suppliers. And in this time when the disruption has already occurred, okay, the main important thing is the information. And the reactive strategy over here, what's listed is mainly focusing on, like say, how you can develop a system which could capture the real-time information and which could be able to capture the real-time information coming from different countries and the companies operating in those countries. The growth of virtual marketplaces. Okay, now that we have seen that the physical interactions, they have come to a halt, so companies started looking at different ways onto how they can create the digital marketplace. Like say, for example, the automobile industry. Okay, so like say the customers, they can't walk down physically to a dealer or a distributor to see the car and have a trial run and so on, but then still they can visit the virtual marketplace and they can have a virtual experience of that particular car. Okay, so this is the many companies, automobile companies, they have come out with this particular technology. And right now we can also see, like say, how the learning and the training industry has come out with this Zoom platform, the use of Zoom platform, the Microsoft Teams and so on. Okay, so this is basically a reaction that we can't meet physically, but then yes, we can always meet virtually. So this is a basically reactive strategy. Supply chain simulations. Okay, so now the disruption has occurred. We want to look for different ways, like whether this option is going to work, whether option B is going to work, whether option C is going to work, and what are going to be the possible results of these options. Okay, so we have to run a lot of simulations and then see how it is going to work. So like say, for example, if I want to operate only 5 plants with a limited manforce, how much is going to be the productivity, how much is going to be the cost of production. So I want to do all these calculations now. Okay, so this is basically something which the companies are using for reacting it in a particular way. Now, again, we see that supply chain collaboration also repeats itself as a reactive strategy. Then the use of inventories and the reserve capacity. So this is basically always has been a short-term reaction from the many companies to use the inventories and the reserve capacity to react to a particular situation. So basically now that the manufacturing has stopped, if we have inventory, use the inventory, make the sales. Okay, so that's what is the reactive strategy. And then the business continuity plans, wherein like say the processes and the systems basically have to work, and we look for different ways through which we can make our business run. So basically what the major impact comes, the first impact that comes or it has on the company is that, like say, when my production has stopped, my services has stopped, my business has stopped working. In that case, the major crunch that I feel, or the major implication I have is on the availability of the working capital. Now, how do I manage this working capital? So for this, I would like to see that some of the aspects of my business still start running, and then I get some money flow, okay, within my organization. And then the decision-making proximity, like how closely you are placed to each other so that quick decisions can be made. Okay, now this is something which is very reactive strategy, because we see that the decision makers in a company, then they can't come together, they can't take decisions, and then virtual medium cannot be always a solution for you to come out with some brainstorming decisions, right? So the companies, they try to allow working of some executives on the plant, okay, physically, not remotely. So a structural strength or a structural number of people to be allowed coming to the organization so that the quick decisions can be made and decisions can be going fast. Okay, so with this background on the proactive and the reactive strategies, we started our study, and this is what the conceptual research framework we had used. So basically, we see that there are two components to building the supply chain resilience. So the first component is about the evaluation, and the second component is about the strategies. So within which we are going to have the proactive and the reactive strategies, and classified as short-term and the long-term strategies. The methodology used was a three-phase methodology. Okay, so in the first phase, it was basically more on analyzing the supply chain resilience or assessment of the supply chain resilience of the two industries, that's the automobile and the airline. And this assessment was done purely based on the secondary sources of information, the published sources, the numbers coming from this industry. And here we mainly carried out two analyses. The first was time to recovery, because this is what was mentioned as one of the possible ways to measure the resilience of a supply chain, and the financial impact this disruption has had on the different supply chains. In phase 2 and phase 3, we focused on the resilience strategy. In phase 2, we identified what are the key short-term resilience strategies that are going to be used by these companies. And over here in this particular stage, we had an empirical survey. So already we had a list of strategies available from the literature, and we approached 145 respondents, 88 representing from the automobile companies, the supply chains, and 57 from the airline industry. Okay, and over there we did some analysis to identify the top strategies. In phase 3, we had semi-structured interviews. We had meetings with 14 executives, 7 from the automobile and 7 from the airline industry. And here we had discussions on, like, say, what could be their future strategies. Okay, and all put together, all the findings of all these 3 phases helped us to develop our framework, which we refer it as to be the supply chain resilience framework. So you could see that it's a combination of both a qualitative and a quantitative approach. Okay. Now this is the first part, the first phase, the supply chain resilience evaluation. Now this is what we actually studied, the time to recover. So what you could see over here is that a company's normal performance before the disruption is shown by this line over here. The disruption has happened at this particular time, T suffix O. Okay. With the disruption, you see the performance of the company is dropping down. Okay. Now it reaches a low. From there, it can follow this path. It can further slip down. From there, it can come up slowly. From here, it can come up quickly. Okay, so if it's going to come up quickly, if it's going to recover quickly, so this line, the line A, okay, here we call that as a V-shaped recovery, V-shaped recovery, okay. If it's going to take time, okay, and be remaining there at the bottom for long and then recovering, that is going to be referred as a U-shaped recovery. Okay, so we're going to have two types of recoveries, V-shaped and U-shaped. Okay, and then we have something which is just going down, and the company is just going to be out of the business. Okay, so if they're not able to manage the disruption, they're out of the business. So this is what we would not like to have. So again, as I told you, we did the TTR analysis and we also did the financial impact analysis. Okay, see, we used the different data sources for the TTR. So we use the production forecast for the automobile industry, for the airline industry, the forecast of the travel industry, the employment impact, the production impact in the automobile, okay, and the tourism impact, the cargo impact. So we use different sources available to us, secondary sources of data. Okay, in the phase 2, as mentioned before, we had approached 382 automobile companies. So I remind you, phase 2 was for measuring the short-term resilience strategy. It was a survey. We approached 145 companies, 38% from the automobile and the remaining from, sorry, 60% from the automobile and 40% from the airline industry. So there's the profile of the companies we approached in the second phase. So if you could see more interestingly that these companies were representing different parts or different continents. We had Europe, Asia, and Africa. In Asia, we also had India, but then the representation was very less. Maybe only for the airline, we had one person from AirAsia, and for automobile, we had one person representing from Mahindra company. Okay, but then most of the representatives were coming from the different parts of Asia. Likewise, we had Europe, we had Africa. In terms of the size of the companies, we had of different sizes. Okay, and also in terms of the supply chain roles, like they are performing, we had different representations. And phase 3, wherein, like say, we had discussions to understand the long-term resilience strategies. So these were all the people whom we had approached. So 7 representing from the airline industry and 7 coming from the automobile industry. Okay. Now coming to the findings. So we did the recovery analysis, the time to recover analysis using the information. And we built 2 scenarios. Okay, we built the scenarios for U-shaped and we also built the scenario for a V-shaped recovery. So just before this slide, I had talked about, like say, what is meant by a U-shaped recovery and what is meant by an V-shaped recovery. Now here the results are seen for the automobile industry, and then we see for the different continents what has been the impact, and we give the projections, okay, in terms of, like say, the recovery when it's going to be a V-shaped and it's going to be a U-shaped. And so this is used basically for the TTR analysis, and over here we could see the financial impact, okay, in 2 situations, when in case we're going to have a V-shaped and we're going to have a U-shaped. So as I told you, V-shaped is a faster recovery and U-shaped is a slow recovery. And then for the automobile industry, what we projected in May 2020, okay, was that if in case we are going to have a U-shaped recovery, that recovery would be happening by the 4th quarter of 2020. And if it was going to be a V-shaped recovery, it could happen just at the end of Q1 of 2020. Okay, and now we are in the 4th quarter of 2021, and we saw that the automobile companies, they recovered by Q2 of 2021. So our prediction, what we had made for this industry, was more applicable for a V-shaped recovery. Okay, so as per our prediction, what we had done, the two predictions, the automobile industry, what we see today, has had an V-shaped recovery. Okay, and for that, what were the strategies? Okay, that we'll have a look at it very soon. Now, this is for the airline industry. Okay, so we use the data and then we just again plotted it for its future based on the forecasting model we deployed based using the second information. So again, we derived two situations. One was the V-shaped and the other one was the U-shaped. As per the V-shaped, the airline industry was supposed to recover by Q3 of 2021. So compared to the automobile industry, it was a slow recovery. Okay, and as per the U-shaped, okay, it could be like say the Q4 of 2022, that is one more year. And what we could see today is that we are in the fourth quarter of 2021, and still we see that these airline companies have not yet recovered. It's going to take time for them. So what we see over here based on our analysis is that this industry is not going to follow a V-shaped recovery. This industry is recovering slowly and it's going to take more time. And then it could be just possible after one more year. That is as per our prediction. Okay, we have not updated the information. This information is just taken from the analysis what we had done in our study in May 2020, and still it is valid. Okay, that's what I can say, and we are happy to showcase this particular finding to the world that okay, that it's going to be still time for the airline industry and it's going to be slow. Okay, so this is coming from our analysis, the survey what we had done, and we had approached in the survey the practitioners from both the automobile and the airline industry, and this is what they mentioned. So working capital impact was reported very high by the airline companies or the supply chains. Okay, followed by the sales impact and the overall impact. If you see that the overall impact is of all these four factors, that's the supply chain, manufacturing service shutdown, working capital, and then the sales. Okay, so the overall impact what we could see was more for the service industry as compared to the manufacturing industry, but then the difference is not much, it's 4.56 and 4.78 on a scale of 5. So working capital was seen or reported as a major factor when it comes to the airline, and when it comes to the manufacturing sector, it is the shutdowns what has impacted them very badly. Okay, and in terms of the supply chain disruptions, the manufacturing supply chains, they have reported a high disruption as compared to the airline supply chain. Okay, so these are the various response strategies. Now, what could be of interest to us is the differences in the opinion of the airline and the automobile companies. So first we could see the rank. So the highest for the airline industry, what we could see in terms of their response strategy, what they have deployed is 4.20, and that is business continuity plans. So basically they want to see to that how they can keep the aircrafts flying. Okay, so that was the main concern and that was the main strategy, and that was done with help of the governments. Okay, with help of the air bubbles. Okay, so they could put pressure on the government and they could see to it that, like say, their flights are allowed to fly with reduced number or with reduced capacity. The highest in the automobile industry was the big data driven and the real-time information system. So many of these automobile companies, they started investing heavily on the big data driven and the real-time information, as well as the strategy involved localization of the ecosystem, that is supply selection, who are going to be based locally, use of the industry for technologies like big data again, like IoT and so on. Okay, so that is what was the response the top response strategies of an automobile company or supply chain. And for the airline, the top was again big data, and it was creation of the virtual marketplaces and the business continuity plans. So focus on supply chain focus, so social supply chain focus was also rated on a higher side. So these are the priority, and these were the key strategies that were used by these companies. We used clustering approaches to see how these companies are prepared to implement the strategies, and then we could classify these companies into 3 categories. So companies which were well prepared, companies which were partially prepared, and the companies which were ill prepared. Okay, so that was the classification we could do with the available data with us. Similarly, we did it for the airline industry. Okay, and then sharing the results of the long-term strategy. So one was about the digital-driven data analysis capabilities, human awareness. So this is the results coming from the qualitative study or the interactions with the experts, the practitioners. As I mentioned that we had approached 7 experts from the automobile companies and 7 experts from the airline supply chains. And then these were the identified long-term strategies. Okay, so the long-term strategy included digital-driven data analytics capabilities. So the companies wanted to develop that for the future. And here we could see what was the explanation for basically suggesting this strategy. So they wanted to bring in an awareness in the staff about how COVID can impact. So basically they said that, okay, it could be the digital data driven capabilities development, human awareness, okay, developing the lifeline and the transportation system, implementing the emerging technologies, getting in the supply chain collaboration. Okay, so these were the reactive strategies. And here we have the proactive strategies. That's in for the long term. Companies would like to go for the digital transformation because we could see that many of the companies, they were operating the traditional way, the conventional way, but now they would like to use the digital capabilities and go for a major change. They want to transform themselves. Okay, then the integrated risk management facilities. Basically, they want to work as a team now, not separated at different locations. And then basically the final one, the social supply chain focus. That's about the corporate social responsibility. Okay, so just to sum it up, so this is about the supply chain evaluation and awareness creation capabilities the companies would like to develop. This is the long-term reactive response strategies. And this is the proactive long-term strategies. Okay. And then finally, based on our study, this is what the model which we have proposed for the industry. That's both the automobile and the airline. And this can be generalized across all the manufacturing sector and the service sector as a representation. Okay, so for you to manage a supply chain disruption successfully, you have to first perform your own analysis. Okay, how well prepared you are, whether you are partially prepared or you are ill prepared, right? Then you have to classify and you have to select your strategies in 2 forms, the proactive strategies and the reactive strategies. And over here, when I talk about the proactive strategies and the reactive strategies, this could be of 2 types. It could be short term and it could be long term. Like say, for example, digital transformation is going to take a lot of time. It's not just going to happen quickly. Okay, it's going to take years. So that is a long-term strategy. Whereas selecting the local suppliers, that could be the company starting very quickly, immediately. Okay, supply chain collaboration initiatives, the companies can immediately start. So we have proactive, we have reactive strategies. Within that, we are going to have short term, we are going to have the long term. So you have to select the appropriate strategies. Okay, so first, analyze your capabilities, your present standing in terms of your preparations. Decide on the proactive and the reactive strategies, both the short term and the long term. And then also see to that, like say, what level of capabilities, okay, and what level of human awareness is going to be in place, because that's going to be supporting for you to implement these proactive and reactive strategies. Okay, and this framework, as I told you, can be generalized for all the industries, which can be categorized into the manufacturing as well as the service, as seen from this particular chart. Now, some recommendations or the points which can be suggested to the industry experts based on a study coming from our analysis. So basically, we have to have an inside-outside approach. So basically, inside-out approach or the control mechanisms. So basically, it's nothing but it all starts on how well you are prepared and how well the capabilities you possess. Okay, so it's basically how strong you are. So basically, inside out. In a sense, like say, you have to be prepared first to deal with the outside disruptions. Online transactions and engagement. Basically, how these supply chains can develop a place for online transactions and engagements. Like say, for example, we have seen the remote service appointments in the automobile industry, right? When it comes to the airline travel, now we see that there's a lot of checks happenings, okay, and then most of these checks now is happening online, like checking of your COVID vaccination status or the PCR reports and so on. Okay, so it's very important for the companies to build some platforms, okay, on wherein, like say, many of the activities can be taken online. Then we have the green agenda and the loan guarantee. So basically, many countries, like say, for example, France, okay, they have started offering loans to the companies or the supply chains which has been badly impacted, right? But then when they're giving the loans, they're also pushing the green agenda. Like say, for example, when the France government has given loan to Air France and KLM, they've put in a condition like say, what initiatives, or they have listed down the initiatives like on to using the greener fuels and reducing the number of flights in future so that they have less carbon footprints and so on. The China government policy. So it's very popular, and what they have done is that when the manufacturing companies were shut down, when they were not producing, China focused on supporting these automobile companies in building their capability in the battery driven vehicles. Okay, and then in 2019, 2020 and 2021, China has mainly focused on shifting or maybe building its capacity on producing the battery operated vehicles. And now we see that China has taken the advantage of this last 2 years closure, and they are maybe now the one of the market leader in terms of the number of production, market leader in terms of the production of the vehicles, the battery operated vehicles. The government can push the banks onto cutting the interest rates for the loans being given to different industries, companies. And international travel is something which has to be there. And already we see that many countries, they have signed the air bubble agreements, and they're trying to push the international travel. And maybe India was supposed to open the international travel from 15th of December, but then we could see that it has not happened. Okay, because of this new threat of Omicron, and it has been pushed another. Okay, so this is what I wanted to present to you, and basically has provided to you an overview of, like, say, how the supply chain resilience can be measured, and what were the different supply chain resilience strategies in the short term and in the long term, and how it could be classified as reactive and how it could be classified as proactive. Okay, so with this, I come to an closure of this presentation, and I, I make the platform open for questions, if any.
Thank you so much, sir, for that insightful address. The research paper that you shared with us was indeed very elaborate and informative. Now, I'll be sharing some questions with you that we got from the audience.
Yeah, please.
The first question that we got is that, as you mentioned about the resilience from COVID, what are your thoughts about the industries, industries learning from this situation to become elastic to such conditions if ever they occur again? So, what are your thoughts on this?
It's always going to be a learning, and no company can become elastic. Like, say, it's not going to be, like, say, rigid. Okay, so this type of disruptions are going to be coming, and it's going to be affecting the supply chains in different forms. Okay, right now the supply chains has been affected because of the new policies, the new norms which has come out because of this COVID-19. Okay, because that includes the closures, that includes, like, say, the lockdowns and the sanitary measures and so on. But the new disruptions are going to bring in new types of challenges. Okay, and the new types of challenges are going to give rise to new type of solutions. So right now, the study what has focused, or maybe whatever the resilience strategies what we have seen, they have emerged out with reference to the company's reactions or be to become proactive to a certain class of threats that's being posed by COVID-19. Now, when something new disruption is going to happen in future, we don't know whether these strategies are going to work or not. But then, yes, with the improving technology, with the new technology innovations, there are going to be always some new solutions coming up in the future. Hope I'm able to answer this question.
Yes, sir. You explained it really well. Now, Prabhat will be taking up the second question.
So the audience wanted to know about, did risk sharing across supply chain increase drastically after COVID-19? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the risk sharing across supply chain has improved actually. Okay, so it's changing and it's going to take time because it's one of the long-term strategy. Now, what happens is that, like, say, when we talk about any supply chain, the supply chain is too scattered and there are many partners. Okay, like, so for example, if we just take the supply chain of an automobile. Okay, now we just talk about, like, say, the different parts of a supply chain. The different components that goes into an automobile. Okay, they're going to be more than 3,000 parts that goes into a car. Okay, and then it means that we're going to be having more than 3,000 suppliers coming on with the company. Okay, and again, it depends on the present strategy of the company, whether they have a single sourcing strategy or they have a dual or a multiple sourcing strategy for that particular part or component. Now, this increases the complexity of the supply chain, and bringing in the risk management across integrated risk management or sharing across all these partners at present is just not going to be happening very quickly. The companies has to be doing that in the phases, and the companies have already started doing that, but that's going to take time. So first, the companies has to decide whether it's just the risk sharing across a few selected suppliers or the key suppliers, or it's going to be across all the suppliers. Now that encourages the use of blockchain technology. Okay, wherein, like, say, a blockchain, if implemented across the supply chains, in that case, it's because of the cost aspects and also because of the number of partners that can be put on a blockchain. It has to be having a restriction on it. Okay, so when a company is going to think about implementing a blockchain, okay, that risk sharing across supply chains is going to be automatically going to be putting in place. Okay, so but that's going to be taking time, and these measures are going to be very costly. Okay, so maybe the small ancillaries over there on the supply chain as a suppliers for the big companies, they may not afford to be coming on through this particular platform. So that's also going to be remaining a big challenge for these companies.
Thank you so much, sir. So due to time crunch, we will not be able to take any more questions. So we had two eminent speakers on supply chain risks and disruptions. While Mr. Rohit Bhat focused on risk from the practitioner viewpoint, Sachin sir spoke about proactive and reactive strategies for supply chain disruptions from an academic perspective. It was indeed fascinating to understand the framework, modeling techniques, and the resultant conclusions of the study. Thank you, Professor Sachin, for taking time out of your busy schedule to address us. And as a token of gratitude, we would like to present you with a memento, which will be delivered to you very soon, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
When it comes to an all-round holistic growth and understanding the current corporate scenario, it is best to learn from the people who are already accustomed to it. It is crucial for anyone to gather as much information about the current trends as one can. Understand the current state of the industry and experience how professionals come up with modern day solutions to improve their processes. To facilitate this, we have with us today Mr. Vasant Mugada, who is a senior director at GEP, and Mr. Sandeep Chatterjee, who is a director at Deloitte.
Mr. Vasant is a seasoned procurement and supply chain management professional. He has been delivering sustainable cost savings and process improvements across industries over his 10 plus years of experience under various roles in GEP. He received his MBA from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. His areas of expertise include procurement transformation, change management, and strategic sourcing. He has contributed to several large-scale supply chain and operation consulting engagements and has successfully impacted his clients through tens of millions in savings resulting from process improvements. We are delighted to host you, sir. We would now like to pass the baton to Mr. Vasant Mugada to share his enlightening words with the audience on the topic, a period dominated by uncertainties and rapid transformations. Over to you, sir.
Perfect. Thank you very much, team. I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir, absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I truly appreciate it. And I would also want to thank the whole team for this opportunity. I was listening into Professor Sachin Kamblay's presentation. It was very insightful, and actually it talks a lot about what we are seeing, and those are pretty much in line with possibly a lot of stuff which you'll see during my presentation as well. But I'll take you through some of the uncertainties which we are facing, both on the procurement and supply chain space, and what can be done. I think that was one of the questions which was posted, and we can do a bit more deep dive into it. So having said that, I'll just possibly just go ahead and present my screen. Please allow me a minute. I think I shared the wrong one. Yeah. Please let me know once you're able to see my screen.
Yes, sir, we are able to see the screen.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just put it on full screen. Perfect. So, yeah, thank you for that introduction once again. Just to add to what Tanya mentioned as a part of the introduction, I joined GEP in 2010 after my MBA, and prior to MBA, I had about 3 years of experience with Infosys in the IT space, and IT and supply chain space. And post that, I joined GEP as a senior consultant, and over the years, I grew along with the company, and I'm now a senior director in the consulting function. I work with over 35 odd clients across the globe, pretty much worked across all the geographies across the globe. The key industries which I've been associated with are life sciences, CPG, retail, and manufacturing. So these are the ones which I've had my experience in. And some of those slides which we'll talk about will also kind of focus on those. And I started my journey in the procurement space. And over the course of these years, GEP has also expanded into the supply chain space. So I've sort of joined, the expansion spree and also worked on multiple clients in the supply chain space. And that's what we wanted to bring to the forefront here as to what are those uncertainties and how do we look at mitigating some of the risks, or at least proactively identifying those risks and planning for them. So that's what we will talk about during this next 20-25 minutes. So I'll quickly take you through GEP. GEP was formed in the year 1999. The full form, or GEP, stands for Global E-Procure. So we started as a procurement company, and over the years we also grew into the supply chain space. And today we are one of the global leaders in the procurement and supply chain space. We are named by several leading analysts in the industry, be it the Gartners or the Forresters, so on and so forth. 5,500 plus employees, 24 offices. Our headquarters is in Clark, New Jersey. And then the other next big location from a people standpoint is in Mumbai, which is in India. Over 500 plus customers. Most of these are Fortune 500, Global 2000. Several of them are Fortune 50. So there were Fortune 10 companies as well, which we work with. In terms of some of the service offerings, we provide consulting services, that is the strategy related portion. And then we also have our own in-house software, which is GEP Next and GEP Smart. And then we offer managed services to several of our clients in the space of supply chain and procurement. We work across all the dimensions, that is plan, procure, make, and deliver. Off late, and you'll see a lot of this in the following slides as well, there is a lot of emphasis on digital-led transformation, as Professor Kamble was saying. Reducing costs, improving business agility and resilience, focus on EBITDA. There's a lot of uncertainty today. Focusing on cash flow. There was a certain point where there were cash flow crunches. People are looking for identifying, how to mitigate that particular risk. Optimizing working capital, and also focusing on gaining competitive advantage. So those are the things which we focus on from a service offering standpoint, and we work with several companies on a day in, day out basis. And this particular presentation will be a mix of our understanding based on our current working with most of these companies. So jumping into the topic for today, which is a period dominated by uncertainties and rapid transformations. What we are seeing is the COVID-19 pandemic, at least, has tested all of us on all possible fronts, right? So when the lockdowns were being imposed, there was a huge round of uncertainty around the business continuity. What would be the BCP? Companies were running around developing those BCPs around people working from home, so on and so forth. But we being human beings, we were quickly able to transform. Businesses were quickly transforming, and so were the governments as well, to adapt to this new normal. What we see is a lot of the uncertainties which we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also foresee those to exist in the future, be it the short term, medium term, and the long term. And it is for us to ensure that we are able to see what sort of challenges are coming and adapt to those changes accordingly. So currently, some of the things which we are seeing, a very, very volatile labor market, right? So there was a period where in the labor market, there was a shortage in terms of talent prior to the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, we were not able to find people because of the pandemic. Business continuities, we had to bring in more people, so on and so forth. And right now, there is a new challenge altogether. We're talking about the Great Resignation. So businesses are facing increased cost pressures because of this, and that we are seeing across the board. So that is with the volatile labor market. We're also seeing several risks from a geopolitical standpoint across the globe, across geographies. Professor Kamble was talking about this in pretty much of a detail. Environmental disasters, we are seeing them more and more coming in, and a lot of the companies are looking to contribute to mitigate a lot of these disasters or work towards a better, greener globe going forward. So that is also one of the pieces which will come into forefront very, very quickly in the near future. So this is a quick overview of a report which we worked along with The Economist. The survey was conducted by The Economist. And as a part of this, about 400 plus CXOs and directors in the supply chain and procurement organizations were interviewed. And we wanted to understand, what are those key challenges and key issues which they're facing. Some of the key industries which was a focus area were agriculture, industrial, automotive, CPG retail, chemicals, aerospace, healthcare, so on and so forth. So what we understood as a part of this was more than half of the executives reported that their supply chains did get disrupted because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was not just because of the new ways of working, but there were several new threats as well. That is, cyber attacks, commodity price fluctuations, regulations were changing. And even today, we are facing that when we are developing procurement strategies, new supply chain strategies for companies in terms of sourcing their raw materials or from the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers across the globe. Right, so these things are continuing to be there as a challenge, and these will continue to be there in the future as well. Over 64% of the companies reported revenue losses between 6 to 20%. That's a very, very big number for multiple clients in the year 2020. And there were damages to the company brand reputations, and that led to increased cost of operations. And I think you've heard this several times now, but companies started focusing on developing redundancy, and resilience is a key focus area, then focusing on speed and efficiency, right? So we used to talk about just in time, right, in the past, and now it is all about just in case. But these are two opposite dimensions from a spectrum, right? So just in time is more around minimizing your inventory, your working capital related expenses, versus just in case is the other extreme, where you have a lot of inventory and a lot of working capital, but you are able to respond back to the customer requirements very, very quickly. So a classic example of this would be when the pandemic hit, there was a huge requirement from all the FMCGs to ensure that sanitizers would be there on the on the shop, right? When you go to a shop, you should be able to see sanitizers. So the supply chain had to quickly sort of change and ensure that there is a sanitizer available in any retail store which you go to. If it is not the case, then that is loss of revenue for them. So they had to quickly adapt to that particular change. And so is the case with several other companies. At the same time, customer preferences are changing. So you'll also need to focus on that. Historically, for any new product introduction which used to happen, the time to introduce a new product was anywhere between 6 to 9 months or so. And of around 12 to 15 new products which you would introduce, 1 or 2 would survive at the end of 18 months, 18 to 24 months. So that entire period has come down. So there is a rapid need for innovation. And at the same time, that success of those new products is also lower now because the customer preferences are changing because of the new ways of working. So these supply chain disruptions are expected to continue. There is no looking back, and we need to start focusing on how will this sort of new future be. So all the companies, all the CEOs, CXOs, you read through them in the papers. Those are the things which come when we talk to several of these CXOs almost on a daily basis. How do you ensure that we are able to look at these disruptions? So a few quick things about these disruptions, right? So just because we had to adapt to this new normal, we looked at some of the key challenges and came up with very quick, short-term, quick solutions, right? So those were more like the quick fixes. But then in the long run, these were opportunities to fundamentally change the way in which a business would work. So in terms of the challenges, we've discussed some of these, but the big ones are sort of the lack of visibility, right? So your parts or the raw materials availability to the manufacturer, that is the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, or in some cases tier 3 supplier visibility, lack of collaboration within the functions, within the businesses. Again, it used to be pretty much focused on my particular function, my particular ways of working, how much should I collaborate, so on and so forth. There is a huge shift in market dynamics, which we were talking before. And there was an impact in the cash flow, which continues to be the case even today. And massive disruptions across the value chain, right? So when you're working with contract manufacturers and companies, suppliers, they're shutting down, contract manufacturers shutting down, not able to sustain, so on and so forth. So sudden changes in the space, and then M&As, which are very prevalent in this space right now. As companies are shutting down or applying for bankruptcies, M&As are taking place in the market, and then you may or may not be able to work with that particular supplier once an M&A happens. So there is a new level of uncertainty which comes into picture. So some of the quick solutions, at least what we've worked with some of our clients, is to see how they can invest in new capabilities. We're seeing this across the globe today. A lot of the companies which had their digital roadmaps for the next 4 to 5 years, right? Whatever they had in their digital roadmap for the next 4 to 5 years, they brought it in almost 4 or 5 years ahead, and they're starting to implement it. They see a lot of value in developing that visibility in the supply chain space. So they are investing in the digital space. Again, this is the results. For the results to start hitting, it will take a bit of time. It's not something which is a switch, right, which you can switch on and you'll be able to get it. But at least there are some low-hanging fruits which you'll be able to get. Those are, say, the proactive, the predictive, and proactive related analytics, digital analytics, digitization of a lot of the data which they have, so on and so forth, which we pretty much see in this particular space. Improving and streamlining the execution of workflow. So we work with several of our clients to redevelop, relook at their overall processes, make them ready for the next frontier, right? So when they digitize it, are they ready for that? Like, do they have the right level of data? Do they have the right level of tools for a next maybe 6 months or 1 year digitalization journey, right? and built a lot of self-service business processes, right? So this is something we worked as quick solutions. But what it also led is we were able to develop these long-term opportunities for clients, and we told them that, there is a fundamental need to change the way you're operating today. So talk about the quick fixes, right? So a lot of it people used to source from APAC in the past. We see that today in the freight market, we were just talking about it in the past session, freight from China, right, and some of the APAC regions, it has gone up by about like 40 to 80% in some of the cases because of shortages or shutdowns, so on and so forth. So there is a fundamental need, and several companies have started investing in nearshoring, having warehouses closer to the end customers. It's not across the board. Some of the companies have started to look at alternative manufacturing locations, alternative warehousing locations, to ensure that they are able to take care of these or mitigate these risks. So there is a fundamental change in the operating model. Again, by industry, be it the healthcare, be it retail, CPG, so on and so forth. Every industry has a different way to look at it here. Prioritizing on people. We are talking about great resignations right now. People are working hard. There's a lot of stress which is happening, which people are going through right now. Supplier engagement, again, is a very big area. Supplier risk assessment, risk management was a big focus area. Even prior to the pandemic, we were working with several clients in the past. But this is all the more important because of the current dynamics. Suppliers are applying for bankruptcy. So we are seeing a lot of uncertainty because suppliers are not able to predict their raw material prices in the right way. So they are facing a lot of risks. They're not able to manage the margins which they have. Like historically, if a supplier would have through a should costing exercise, right? Like we ascertain that a supplier has about 12 to 15% margin. Because of the raw material price increases or labor prices or some of these other costs which are there in the whole dynamics, if the supplier is not able to work through their costing in the right way, there is a big challenge. They're going ahead and applying for force majeure clauses. They're not able to manage the prices better. So we've worked with several clients where we're partnering with the suppliers to ensure that they're not getting into that space and companies are investing with them. So enhanced supplier management, working with them together, providing them that intelligence if they don't have it is also becoming very important. Innovating with purpose, again, co-innovation with the suppliers, being ready for the future, identifying what are the key big themes, and definitely unlocking funds is a big focus area. So these are some of the big long-term opportunities which we've seen and worked through. So just looking, we've discussed about this. I'll allow you guys to go through this slide and read it. But what we're talking about is there are demand disruptions. There's an increased volatility. Manufacturing distribution center closures we're seeing, raw material shortages, supplier shutdowns we're seeing them. So what are companies doing right now, right? So this is something which most of the companies are already doing, or some of the companies are working towards it, right? So resilience and achieving a balance between short-term and long-term goals is very important. There's a very classic example which we keep citing or we keep hearing. There are two companies, say a company A and a company B, and company A used to do very, very well pre-pandemic. JIT processes, very solid quarter-on-quarter growth, established supplier relationships, preferred suppliers, very solid processes, so on and so forth. And then there is a company B, which was sort of fluctuating, more working as the businesses saw their future. They used to focus on the shorter term changes and focus on a much broader vision per se. And during the pandemic, we saw a shift, a big shift in this. Company A was not able to live with the same set of process. They were running haywire, trying to transform the procurement process, the supply chain transformation. They went through a supply chain transformation engagement and try to identify, tell me what are those 5 things which are really important for me right now, right? In all these areas. So we worked with several of these companies to identify, what is that right balance for us in the next 3 months, 6 months, and then reconfigure that, re-evaluate that in the near short term. So company B, interestingly, was operating very well during the pandemic. They were able to respond back very well to the overall pandemic, be it the resilience, be it the capacities which they had, be it redundancies which they had built into their whole supply chain. They were able to respond back very well. So what does the future of the supply chain look like, right? So this is something which again is a big balance which a lot of the companies are doing right now. However, before investing a lot of money, a lot of the companies are really cautious about, tell me what exactly is the short term, medium term, and long term. We simply cannot switch to a high redundancy model just because something is going on right now. Versus you cannot be very lean as well. So tell me what is that right balance, right? So removing cost versus ensuring customer value. So there is a very subtle balance, and it is pretty much dependent on the core mission of that particular company, on how they want to work in the future, right? So the first aspect of it is definitely building that resilience and being responsible from a supply chain standpoint. What we've seen is several companies have built that resilience. They've built several proactive risk indicating tools, invested heavily into digital technologies, be it artificial intelligence, machine learning related stuff, to be able to tell them or indicate, how and what sort of risks are coming up, and to be able to, I would not say you'll be able to manage every possible risk, but at least know that there are certain risks which are coming up and prioritize which of these risks should I really focus on, without which I cannot live. So those are the things which are there. And right now there is a huge focus on prioritizing redundancy over resilience and speed. There is a focus on improving redundancy and resilience. Historically, it used to be speed. Right now, if a product is not there on the shelf, then customers would switch away to a different brand. That's the CPG world. In the pharma world, you'll need to have a product. It'll cost several lives, again, if you're not able to respond back in time. And building transparency, this is, again, a very big factor, what we see today. People need to know how you're collaborating with your tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. How is your supply chain going into your customers, right? So your primary distribution, secondary distribution, how is that particular flow? How is your customer segment changing? What are you getting in from there? How are you able to feed it back to your your suppliers, and how are you able to innovate better, so on and so forth. So that transparency is, again, very important. And there is a big need today. What we are seeing historically, there used to be a set of suppliers you used to partner with. Right now, there is a larger pool of preferred suppliers, better supplier collaboration workshops, trying to understand how do you engage with suppliers better from an innovation perspective? How can they contribute? How can you help them grow in whatever aspects and dimensions it is possible? So there is a better need for that exchange of information with the suppliers. There is a big focus on efficient cost management. Again, cost is a big area because you're talking about redundancy. So cost, obviously, you'll need to monitor very closely how much is the cost impact. So focusing on all the resources, trying to identify which are the high value ones, high value spend categories, what will be the impact on them? How can you mitigate some of the cost increases? Or how do you continue with it? How long will you need to continue, right? So those are the things which are important. Having an optimized procurement process, supply chain processes, be it inventory, planning, ordering, and how do you also focus on digitalization, analytics adoption? I think most of the companies today, 99% of the companies have invested in digitalization over the past 3 years, and more in the recent years, we've worked with several of them on this particular journey and in the analytics space, helping them proactively identify, what are the risks? How do you identify the trends which are coming up in the future by commodity, by category, in the space of inventory, so on and so forth. And also enabling growth, right? So by participating or helping suppliers and working with them collaboratively to track inputs from them and providing predictive risk intelligence based on suppliers. Actionable market insights, right? So this is again very important for a procurement professional. Earlier or this quarter, when we were doing the planning for several clients, there were several indicators which we had internally, where the freight prices, the road freight prices were, we were seeing an uptick in the freight prices. We were working with very many clients to talk to them and move out some of the procurement related, contract renewal related discussions with them in the logistics space to say Q3, Q4 of next year, just through these real-time actionable market insights, right? So it's not just about pricing. Again, these pricing models are very complex models, go across multiple dimensions. But we were able to work through them, bring in feeds from the qualitative factors, social factors, so on and so forth, and build these actionable market insights. And again, these insights change by category. By category, what we mean is logistics, IT as a category, MRO, which is maintenance, repair, be it capital purchases. Again, capital also, a lot of the aluminum prices, or you name those raw material prices, they are also going up. So we've been able to build those and take them into consideration. Focus on flexible, agile operating model and create an ecosystem of partners, again, from a supplier standpoint. So that is the balance, and it is again a continuously evolving one. A lot of the CEOs, CXO level people are very closely monitoring this almost on a very frequent basis these days. Like, what is that balance happening, or how is it today? A very quick use case of it, I'll not get into it. I know I'm running out of time, but what I'll do is I'll tell you a specific use case about COGS, how companies are trying to improve or focus on better COGS, the cost of goods sold. So through advanced analytics and real-time market intelligence, some of the factors which I was talking about, using AI, ML, should costing tools, predictive forecasting, market intelligence, value engineering, and focusing on outcome-based engagements, we are able to quickly respond to global arbitrage, like where should you source your materials from? Should you source it from China, US and China, because of the trade war? There's a huge import duty which is there. So where else can you look at? How else? Or are there any alternatives, or you'll need to continue with it? How is it a short-term thing? Is it a long-term thing? What are the key factors which go into it? That's just an example, and there's several such examples which are there. Should I focus on the APAC-centric model to a Europe-centric model or an India-centric model? Where else should I have my manufacturing process? Pricing constructs, like allowing raw materials, the suppliers to shield themselves from any raw material price fluctuations is again important, and focus on choosing the right materials and services to identify the best business outcomes, right? Collaborating with the suppliers and trying to remove that risk of uncertainty with them, like partnering with them is again an important one. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'll share some case studies on this particular slide, but I'll not go into this. And I'm open to any questions which may be there.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the topic, sir. It was very insightful, and I hope it gave an holistic overview of how companies need to work on their supply chains to be more sustainable. Now we have a few questions with us, which I'll be directing towards you. So the first question is, how does GEP ensure that they stay relevant to the market trends, considering it is a consulting firm?
This is an excellent question. In terms of us, from a market perspective, there are multiple aspects which go into it. One of the key aspects is supplier working together with suppliers, right? Like you'll know the core pulse from an industry perspective. From a technology perspective, what we understand through our discussions with CXO level people is what are the key problem statements which they are looking at. We do these surveys of CXO level members, trying to understand what are the key problem statements which they are looking at. How do they prioritize this? What are the short-term, medium-term, long-term focus areas? And there is a core group of subject matter experts which are there within the company. So through a collaboration across all these areas, from the clients, from the suppliers whom we talk to almost on a day in, day out basis, and also internally through the SME network, we try to make sure that we are preparing for the next new norm. In the procurement space, we've been there for quite some time. We know processes in and out. We've worked with companies, even in the supply chain space, right? We've worked with companies, even in the, you call it the sinusoidal curve, right? So at the top, when companies are really doing well versus when companies are not doing well, we've had those solutions developed, tailored to them. So there are certain nuances which we bring in from our historical practice as well, and try to build solutions which are very customizable and specific to clients. So it's like a combination of multiple factors which go into it. I don't know if that answers your question, but this is something we try to look at on an ongoing basis, trying to identify these problems and help clients.
Yes, sir, it definitely did answer my question. So due to time crunch, we'll have to limit ourselves to this number of questions. So now we learned that GEP is doing pioneering work in helping enterprises to operate and optimize their supply chains. We learned in depth about the impact of COVID on supply chains and how organizations can collaborate and integrate their suppliers. Thank you, Vasant sir, for the interesting talk. And as a token of thanks, we would like to present you with a memento, which will be delivered to you very soon.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, team. It was a pleasure speaking with all of you this morning. And
Likewise,
I wish you all the very best in your careers ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to the next speaker of this segment, we would like to introduce Mr. Sandeep Chatterjee. Mr. Sandeep is a director with Deloitte, leading the supply chain and emerging technologies practice. He holds an MBA from IIM Kozhikode and Bachelor in Engineering from IIEST Shibpur. Previously, he had worked with KPMG, Oracle, Infosys, and Tata Motors. Currently, he holds the position of the Chairman and CEO of International Supply Chain Education Alliance, India, and member of Board of Governors, IIM Kozhikode. The audience is eager to know your thoughts on Supply Chain 4.2, sir. The stage is all yours.
So, good morning, and thank you again for inviting me. Again, it's a pleasure and honor to be here. So again, I'm not using the background which I had suggested. I would have loved to, but I thought that maybe I will go ahead with this. So hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir. We can hear you clearly.
Okay, perfect. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. So over the next half an hour or so, we'll talk about digital supply chain. So given my background, again, this is a disclaimer. Again, I have nothing to hide or nothing to do. But typically what happens is a lot of you will be making presentations in the media, and there are chances of you getting misquoted. So that's why it's a good practice to actually put this disclaimer, because it saves you and it saves also your company. So I have a very structured presentation given my background, because if you look at it, consulting thrives wherever there is ambiguity. So when you say GST came in, you could see a whole lot of consulting firms thriving because there was ambiguity. So companies look for us to help them navigate through this. So whenever you see that, it's always the consultants that try to give a structure, because the moment you structure your problem, the solutioning also becomes quite easy. So I will go ahead and introduce the topic what we are going to talk about today. Then I will talk about how supply chain has changed over the years, and then we talk something around disruption and digitization, which is where the crux of all this is happening. Because, and I think unfortunately we had to have a pandemic to show it to us, uh, because people were thinking about digitalizing, but a lot of these got accelerated because the kind of things which you have seen in this 2 years have not seen in the last 10 years. So maybe unfortunate event which unfolded a lot of things, but there's always a silver lining at the end of every catastrophe. Then again, we talk about some real life examples, because that's important, because what I will talk is theory, but if you don't know, if you really don't appreciate where and how it will apply, it really doesn't make sense. And finally, I leave it with supply chain 2025. That's because typically we are so used to designing things for today, and it's always good to take a futuristic view. Because if you look at our road systems or the railway systems, we are in trouble because we never thought through. But if you compare it with US, they're one of the best road systems in the world, because they thought through 20 years ago in advance that this is going to be the population, and that's why they got into an 8 lane, and what we are doing is simply catching up. It's always good to take a futuristic approach. I know this pandemic has forced us more uncertainty, but uncertainty and risk was always there. Only thing is now that we are taking it very seriously, but we still need to have a starting point, because unless we take some future view, life doesn't. So moving on, let me just introduce it now. If you look at how 1980 used to work, it was more of a seller's market. There was stable demand. So I remember when I went to buy a Bajaj scooter, there was an 18-month waiting period, and people were okay with that. People were willing to wait for 18 months because there was limited choice, and it was a more of a seller's market. And now, if you the example which I give is, you have seen those camera rolls, right? Like now, nobody actually uses a camera roll for taking photographs. Typically, you use a cell phone, or if it is a digital. The thing is, the moment you click a photograph, you know how it will look like. You have an option of doing it, editing it. But those days, it was just one roll. You had to get all those 36, and there were no retakes. And if something is spoiled, it's spoiled. And you were willing to wait for 2 weeks to get it developed in a color studio, in a photo studio, and we were okay with that because there were no options. And Kodak is a very classic example of what we used to do. Now coming back, now we are a world. It's a very different world. Too much of uncertainty. It's complex. There's a lot of competition because if you don't do it, somebody else will. Product life cycles have shortened because every day you see a new offering. So things have become very complex and challenging for everybody. And at the end, it's the consumer which has benefited. Now he is spoiled for choice. And the example which I give is, now you take a photograph, you immediately put it on your social media because you don't want to wait, because everybody wants instant gratification. So you don't have the tolerance time. You don't want to wait. You are very too anxious to do things real fast. So that's why all this mad rush for a 30-minute delivery, 15-minute delivery, because the customer tolerance time has reduced drastically. So that is what is driving all your, because people typically say that supply chain starts from your supplier, but understand supply chain always starts from your customer. You can have an excellent product, you can have an excellent service, but if you don't have a customer, everything falls flat. So supply chain starts from your customer. That's, you have to understand it. Now, the way, this is a very textbookish definition that you will have a supplier, have a producer, a distributor, like a typically manufacturing thing, the products move downstream. But understand that logically it may look like this, but supply chain always starts from your customer. That's very, very critical. And it's never linear. It's multi-directional. It's exponential to the nth level. It's always a web. And we call it as a chain because your chain is as strong as the weakest link. That's why we call it as a chain. Moving on, if this is a typical thing from a Unilever website. So, you know, look at it now. A lot of people said that countries had closed their borders. We are trying to do it self-sufficient. But whatever you say is huge, because it makes more sense to produce in a place where you are the least cost producer and distribute in a place where you make the most money. So if you look at this Unilever website, this is the kind of products they want to distribute all across the world, manufactured in certain pockets of the world. So that's where your supply chain is. It's never linear. It's exponential to the nth degree. It's never unidirectional. It's directional to the nth degree. So because today's customers, they don't just want to interact with your customer sales, they interact with your manufacturing guys, they interact with your procurement guys. So at every point, if you talk about customer experience, that's why there's a feedback loop which goes everywhere. So understand that it's all about rapid product flow. It's not about inventory. It's not about storing, because a lot of people believe that inventory is bad. But understand that if you're talking about 30-minute delivery, you will still need buffers, because buffer has been, actually people think that it's no, I cannot, I should have zero inventory. Zero inventory jet is a myth, because if you're doing a jet, you are transferring your risk to your suppliers. And if I talk about supplier is very much part of my supply chain. So you're moving the risk to somebody else. So if you're talking about a 30-minute, 15-minute delivery, you need to have buffers. The problem is we have more of the bad inventory and less of the good inventory. That is the precise reason that inventory is, actually people think that, oh, inventory is bad. Inventory is not bad. That's, you need to have buffers, but you have to time it, you have to size it really well. Now, this is how it looks like. Now, the point which I wanted to tell you is customer tolerance time has reduced drastically. People are not willing to wait. Products have definitely become more complex, and every customer is important. So everybody wants a custom product. They want importance. They want to feel important. So that's where I think we are seeing all this changes. People are talking about digital supply chains. People are talking about faster delivery. It's because of these changing dynamics, which has, and understand that forecast accuracy is now way, way low. Now, very classic example, classic chicken and egg story. Your supply chain, should it be efficient or responsive? By efficient, I mean you're a low cost producer. So for example, a soap or a paint, or not a paint, a soap or a shampoo. You know what the customer, so you're a low cost producer. But when I say responsiveness, as every customer demands a custom product, you try to respond to them, and that means you are incurring higher cost. But today's supply chain have to be both. Now, how do you do that? You look at the power, the classic thing which I've been reading for the last 10, 15 years, the power of postponement. You have a standardized product, but differentiate it very close to the customer. For example, Asian Paints in the 1990s, if you visit any of these Asian Paints retail outlets, if you ask for some color, if they don't have it, they will say that we will have to make it and give it to you. That's a 3 to 6 months waiting period. But today, if you go to any of these retail outlets, you ask for any color, they will mix and match and give it to you. So you are still an efficient supply chain, but because you are differentiating it very close to the customer, you are responsive. So that's where we are looking at both responsiveness and efficiency. So everybody is trying to do this. So this is where the challenge is. So now do understand that why we are talking about. Now, this is a typical example, like you have a demand somewhere, you have your supplier somewhere, if your distribution center somewhere, you have your customers somewhere. Now, the only way you can connect is using technology, because it's very easy to say that I will outsource. It's very easy to say that you will do it, but outsourcing comes at a cost, because you need better coordination, you need better control, because if something gets delayed, your entire supply chain suffers. Any small hiccup, it has a cascading effect. And because today's supply chains are global in nature. So that's why technology has become very, very critical these days. And thanks to rapid strides in technology, all this is not feasible. Technology existed, but we did not, no two technology could talk to each other. So that is the precise reason that we are seeing a lot of traction around this. Everybody is talking about digitization, because today we have technology which has enabled us. Now, understand that what we spoke about, it's all about adaptive supply chain. Supply chain has to completely adapt. It has to align itself to the business goals, because it cannot be in silos, because the way you do your vision, similarly, the supply chain also has to align with your business strategy. It's very, very critical, very, very important. Now let's look at how disruption and digitization has changed, which has enabled us to do all this. Now, first is technology always existed, I told you. But what has happened is your computing power has increased so much. Your storage has increased, because I remember the first hard drive which I bought was something in megabytes. Bandwidth has expanded. The best part is now any two technology can talk to each other, because 1980s, 90s, integration was a big challenge. People spent billions of dollars just integrating. But today with open source, today with cloud, with rapid changes in technology, today any technology can talk to any other technology. That is the reason all this is, we are seeing the light that this is possible. In fact, if you look at it, 3D printing, very, very common these days. 3D printing always existed, but in 2016, there were 3 companies which went off patent. So that's why it became affordable. Because today technology is affordable, we are able to do this. But to understand that it's still not affordable for small and medium enterprises, it has to come down even further. But having said that, we have still made some good strides in this. Now, if you look at the EPIC score model, typically EPICs again, when I talk about supply chain body of knowledge, I think they are the ultimate authority. So typically they do a plan, source, make, deliver. But here what we have done is we have done the develop and the support model. In terms of develop, what I wanted to talk about is, if you look at the pharma companies, the drug discovery is always a very expensive and it's time consuming. The last vaccine which came out, it took 4 years. But if you look at the COVID vaccine, it took about 8 to 9 months, because we already had clinical data, which could be integrated, which could be, and that's why we were able to do that. Similarly, if you look at it, you spend a lot of time on social media. And the moment you have a smartphone, you have given your data to somebody. So people are analyzing your patterns, and the moment you see that you get notifications that this is something very interesting for you. Then strategic sourcing, nothing really rocket science about it, always existed. Now that only that we have better algorithms to tell us that if I do source it this way, and single supplier is a myth that COVID had demonstrated, because if you look at the India pharma companies, 70% of our APIs, the raw materials, comes from China. And the moment COVID hit us, what happened is our pharma production actually hit. So that's why single supplier is always a myth. You always need to have redundancy, because redundancy is not bad. You have to really get your business moving. Then in terms of, as we work more remotely, smart glasses and all that we have been able to remotely support our offshore manufacturing. That's very, very critical. In terms of dynamic or predictive routing, this is nothing rocket science. Only thing, we have better algorithms, because if you look at an Uber or an Ola, you will see that which route is congested, so it suggests an alternate route. And of course, AR, VR, we are seeing big strides. It's just not for gaming, for maintenance activity. It's like a telemedicine where you're sitting here, you can do a surgery here. So that's what, as people tend to work from remote location. But having said that, not every industry has the luxury of working from home. So that, again, we were very privileged who were able to work from home. But having said that, not everybody was equally privileged. So do understand that some industries cannot work from. Now, I just wanted to briefly touch upon Industry 4.0. If you look at it, the way it started, Industry 1.0, man tried to make his life easy. That's why steam engines came in. Then you had the World War happened, and then everything was destroyed. People looked at efficiency. That's where Industry 2.0 came in. Then 1970s, you saw business had grown too big. So it was not possible to do it using paper and pen. So that's where we started getting into computer, but digitization. But digitization and digitalization, there's a difference. Digitization, you are actually making it digital, but digitalization is where you are connecting. So 1970s to 2000, we were only digitizing stuff. The connectivity was still because no two systems could talk to each other. That's why the ERPs were born. And now, if you look at Industry 4.0, which is driving, it's all about connected devices. Your mobile is connected to your laptop. Your laptop is connected. So you get a notification everywhere, every time. So that's where, and all this is possible, is feasible, because today we have technology which is actually driving all this. So that's why it's has made big strides in terms of our digital supply chain networks. Now this is a myth that because everybody is doing it, I should do it. No, you have to understand where you want to touch it, because a lot of people think that because it always has an ROI, right? Because digitalization is expensive. You need to have a buy-in. You need to prove your ROI. It's better not to do a big bang. You need to take some baby steps. And it's important to understand which is going to give you a better return. For example, customer facing, that maybe is good for you. Similarly, if it's medical science, 3D printing helps. So similarly, if I say in terms of you're an asset heavy company, maybe you can look at a track and trace solution. So where you want to do, you have to really prioritize. Don't try to do everything together. It's a recipe for failure. So that's very, very critical for us to understand. And you must have heard this term digital twin again. It's a glorified thing. The typical thing is what we will look at is you have a physical world. You create a digital replica of that. Why do you do that? Because you have a problem, which is a business problem. You convert it to a mathematical problem. So that's your digital twin. And then you solve the mathematical problem, and then you bring it back to your physical. So that's why I think the digital twin it's a hype. You don't have to really be very, very jittery about that term. Is nothing but a replica of your physical world because today we have AI, ML, which are actually driving all these algorithms. So that actually helps us a lot. Now let's look at some of the real life, because what I spoke about is a theory right now, but let's look at it. So Caterpillar, again, one of the biggest earth moving equipments manufacturers. So they have so many machines and all these need maintenance. Now, if I have to monitor everything manually, it's not possible and it's expensive. So what they have done is they have sensors, and this sensor actually collects data every day, and you know that which needs maintenance. So again, it reduces idle time, it reduces the operator. So again, nothing rocket science about it, but a very smart way of using technology. 3D printing, we spoke about it. There are parts which you will produce once in your life. Airline industry typically is like that because the lead time is pretty high, and there are parts which you will produce once in your lifetime. So that's where I think, in fact, artificial kidneys, artificial heart, they're using. In fact, Fevicol, if you look at it, they do a lot of this prototyping. Prototyping means you have to have a die, you need to have a mold, and then you have to get a customer accept. All this takes time. So 3D printing, you actually do everything on a computer, you feed it to a stylus, and then so they were able to save around 30 crores annually using this. So this is actually very promising technology. Now this we spoke about the Asian Paints example, but what Coke is experimenting is they have these healthy drinks. You have a machine, you ask for any color, any flavor, they will mix and match and give it to you. So they have, again, it's a make to stock for them, but they have differentiating closer to the customer. So that's where I think the ultra delayed differentiation has been a very, very big breakthrough here. Now, this is where I marry consumer behavior with supply chain, because typically if you study consumer behavior, UK, if it's a hot weather, people tend to actually consume a lot of ice creams, not so much in India. And that's why they were wasting because they couldn't predict. So what they have done is they have looked at the weather forecast. They have, based on that, there are algorithms which run, which looks at that this is going to be a hot day, and there's a notification which goes to our warehouse and factory that you start producing. So Tesco was able to save around $140 million in terms of they knew it better. So again, this is where your marketing, your sales, your supply chain, everything is connected. Because never plan a business looking at only one function, but that's a suboptimal planning. So that's where typically in any B school, typically when a marketing case looks at only marketing angle, but it's important to understand that any case, it's always had an integrated angle. So you need to look at all those things. Then again, we spoke about augmented reality. EasyJet, they do the maintenance because maintenance is expensive. Personnel are limited. If they have to travel, they cannot travel everywhere. So using AR, VR, EasyJet has been able to maintain their aircraft. So using remotely. So very, very popular these days. In terms of Walmart, if I look at it, logistics optimization now, any quality inspection, it's a non-value add activity because it doesn't help us. So what happens is this drone, like a drone has come in a big way. So it starts taking photographs, and wherever it compares with the master, that is being checked manually. So in India, it may not be feasible right now because in India, we don't have a problem of expensive manpower. But if you look at China now, a typically cobot actually is cheaper than a human being. So the moment the technology costs come down, we will see more of these coming in. Automation, which is drive, because whatever routine can be automated, wherever there is a decision making, I think you cannot really replace the human brain. Again, in terms of sales optimization, this is nothing, most of the FMCG companies have been doing it. So the moment there is a point of sales data, you can actually look at all this sensor-driven replenishment. So this is very, very important. Now, this is a very, very classic example. So the way I grew up in a very small town. So that's where, if I say, we had a dairy farm where I could see the milk, pure milk. But then Operation Flood happened, and then what happened is there was spurious milk. Now, this company, Stonywell, they have given access that this is the cow being milked. This is how the milk is coming to you. So this is where I think you can look at it. I think an ultimate experience in customer delight, which we have seen. Now I leave it last slide. So it's very important to look at some of the trends because we will have more mega cities. That means you need to plan your logistics better because in India, again, the goods train, passenger trains travel to the same railway line. A very, very infeasible option because that's why your goods train are slower. So that's where I think you need to look at planning your logistics better. Then I said that now every customer is going to be very, very important. So that's why we'll see more segmentation. That's why our supply chain also need to plan that way. We have seen improved supply chain infrastructure. We will see better regulatory. Of course, regulation, we don't have any control, but do understand that the moment the government announced electric vehicles, some of the industries went bust. So you have to watch out for this and you can influence. Definitely, we will have more stronger global connect. And of course, we have more affordable and accessible technology. Technology still has to come down. So these are the trends which you need to really be mindful when you are looking at the next design. So that's where I think, so this is what I'd had. Again, thank you so much for your time. And again, it was a privilege and honor to be here. So, and again, if there are any questions, any comments, I'll be more than happy to answer some of these.
It was a pleasure hearing from you, sir. And I am pretty sure that the audience got some valuable insights on the topic supply chain 4.0. So we have a few questions that were asked. I'll just direct them towards you. So the first question that was asked was, what was the perception of Industry 4.0 15 years ago and what is it today? Can you please substantiate some examples with which helped the organization in transforming its operations to digital?
See, the point is, nobody really thought that any two technology could talk to each other. So people were spending billions of dollars just integrating. So I know people who have made a lot of money just integrating technology. So people never thought that we will come to this level. But then there were rapid strides. And today we know that with the open source, with cloud, any technology can talk to anyone. So whenever you buy a new software, the first thing which you look at is interoperability. So that's where I think it's very, very positive. And if you ask me 15 years down before, people never even thought that it is even feasible.
Okay. Tanya can take up the next question, I think.
Yes, thank you, sir, for sharing such insightful data with us. So the next question we have with us is, does Deloitte use any blockchain technology to increase the efficiency of any process?
Internally, we don't, but we have been advising clients. Blockchain, again, is a promising technology, but only thing is because there are no universal standards and because of the things around cryptocurrency, it is still not popular. I see it as a very promising technology, but it is still a few years before we actually see, because it has come in pharma, but some companies are experimenting it. Some banks have experimented, but it will take a while before we see real, because there are no universal standards for that.
Okay.
Also,
sir.
I would like to ask one more question, sir.
Yeah.
So what is the future of Industry 4.0? Can you share some examples which help the organization with some drastic changes?
See, the point is now you get a notification, right, at 12 o'clock at night that the goods have left the warehouse, you will get a delivery tomorrow. So it's not possible for me to put any manpower at 12 o'clock at night, and there are machines which are doing it. Secondly, if you look at it, all this remote working, Zoom and all that, all connected, right? We can't even think of in a consulting business that we are not meeting face to face with the customer. We will to do it, right? So it's all a mindset change, and it works because consulting is a high touch business, but we were able to do it using high tech and high touch. So that's again a very classic example how Industry 4.0 has helped. It's all about connected devices.
Tanya also has one more question, I think.
So we have one more question for you. So which is more efficient, mega city structure or thorough global urbanization?
See, urbanization is the problem is the farmer's son doesn't want to become a farmer because he has aspirations, right? But I know people, one of my friends, 5 days they are software engineers, 2 days they do farming. The thing is, people like us who want to go back to farming. So I think global urbanization is not the way, because with the climate change and all that, we have urbanized it too much, because it's important that let's not even look at, I think neither megacity or global urbanization, let's not look at it. Let's develop the tier 2, tier 3 cities, but don't mess up too much with nature that we because if you mess up with nature, nature is going to hit us, because now you have floods at odd hours, you have deserts getting rainfall, so the entire thing has changed. So it's better, I will say, none of these is efficient. You have to be mindful of, respectful of the word. That's my answer.
All right.
Okay.
So, thank you.
I think we have one more question. So, sir, how does Deloitte deal with efficiency versus resilience in the supply chain management sector after the COVID-19 pandemic era?
First is resilience comes first, because you are broken, you have to come back. So first you have to survive, you have to be resilient. So once you're resilient, when you have got back, then you can talk about efficiency. So the first step, what we say companies is, you have a crisis, first you survive the crisis. So once you've survived it, you start building upon it. So we have a framework. We have actually advised some of our clients on opening up after post-COVID. So some of these things I cannot share because of confidential reasons, but we have a structure in place, we have a methodology in place, but because resilience comes first and then comes efficiency. Because if I don't survive, it all falls flat.
Thank you so much, sir. This was indeed a very interesting addressal, and I'm sure the audience got some very valuable insights on the topic supply chain 4.0. Continuing with the theme of supply chain disruptions, Sandeep sir emphasized the importance of adaptive supply chains and digital supply networks. Industry 4.0, driven by a vast network of cyber physical systems, is helping organizations to configure their supply chains to excel in competitive objectives. Thank you, sir, for helping us to learn the cutting-edge chain concepts through real-life examples. As a token of thanks, we would like to present you with a memento, which will be delivered to you very soon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and a privilege. And thank you again once for having.
Thank you, sir.
sir.
Thank you.
Now we would like to proceed to the release of Momentum, which is the official operations magazine of Somaiya Institute of Management. A quarterly magazine, Momentum, has readers across the world and has over 20,000 views till now. This quarter's publication is an international edition aligning with this year's Global Supply Chain Management Conference, with articles from USA, Canada, and Sweden published in it. The theme for the current edition of Momentum is digital supply chain. So let us all proceed with the release of December 2021 International Edition of Momentum through this video and have a look at its content. To access this international edition of Momentum, kindly click on the link sent in the chat box.
With this, we come to the end of our forenoon session. I request the presenters, evaluators, and our audience to reconvene post-lunch at 2 p.m. The post-lunch session will be held again on the Zoom platform. We'll begin with the paper presentations at 2 p.m., following which we will be having the roundtable conference, where we will be seeing speakers from Apple, Reliance Industries, Epiroc, and Mahindra Logistics discussing the topic intelligent supply chain. So see you soon at the next session.